I work on a deep-sea fishing boat off the west coast of the US. For years, I've seen nothing odd or terrifying beyond an occasional storm or injuries given to crewmates by rigging or our catch. I've always loved the sea, and always felt safe and at peace on it. However, a few weeks ago, as we were pulling up our catch, something got tangled in our starboard net, and we managed to pull it aboard. It turned out to be a distress buoy, one which had clearly spent a very long time in the water. We examined it, and we found a slightly faded stamp in the metal and polyurethane declaring for it to be turned in to the Navy if found. Now, while the captain went to the wheelhouse to radio it in, I examined it further, finding the radio emitter broken, and then that explained why it had never been picked up. I also discovered a sealed compartment on the side, inside which lay a waterproof baggie. It contained many pieces of paper on which somebody with a very shaky hand had written. What unnerved me was the fact that they seemed to have dried bloodstains on them, and against my better judgment, I opened the bag and read them as we sailed back to port. When I finished, I immediately brought them to the captain, who turned pale as he read them. He jammed them back into the baggie and instructed me to place it back. The tone of his voice indicated that it was a demand, not a request. He also said that the Navy would be meeting us at the dock to collect the buoy. I did as he asked. However, before I did, I used the ship's scanners to make copies. When we got back to port, we indeed were met by a large group of men who immediately swarmed our small vessel. They took the buoy and made us all sign a bunch of papers saying that we would not say anything about what we found. All they would say was that it was classified. They also said that they'd financially reward us. When they left, the captain simply told us to forget about it. And since then, I've kept the copies hidden in my desk. Until now. I debated about what to do and had even thought about destroying them, but I figured that this needed to be shared, and here's the best place I knew. I know I'll likely get in very serious trouble for this, but I'll deal with it when I cross that particular bridge. There was a single date at the top of the first page indicating it was written in 2016. I'm transcribing the pages exactly as written, which may take a bit seeing as how some pages are difficult to read. I'm honestly not sure what to think of it, but if there's any grain of truth to what is written, I'm not sure if I'll ever step foot in the ocean again. Here's what it said. To whoever finds this message, I beg of you, do not let anyone attempt to mount a rescue operation for us. By the time you find this, I, or anyone else on my team for that matter, will be long past the ability of anyone to save. I'm only writing this so somebody in the right position on the surface may have an account of the horrors that have befallen us down here, in the dark and cold void which has become my colleague's eternal tomb. And very soon, will become mine as well. And as a warning, to try and ward off any other scientists, military, or anyone for that matter from attempting to recover what we had been sent down here to uncover and study. It may end up being in vain. God knows I know all too well now that us humans often fail to ignore the warnings that are subtly given to us to stay away, even when they're directly under our noses. But I have to make an attempt anyway with the little time I have remaining, before they find where I've hidden myself. For the record, my name is Desmond Windows. I'm 35 years old, and I'm Well, I was a professor at the University of Oregon Institute for Marine Biology. I've been teaching there for the last 8 years after graduating at the top of my class. I always had a quick thinking and tenacious mind, able to outthink and outperform even some of my own teachers. Due to my accelerated performance, I ended up graduating 3 years earlier than intended. I was personally contacted by the dean himself, asking if I'd be willing to take up part-time tenure to help the small and very much overburdened staff down in Charleston. I immediately accepted the offer. I always loved being able to teach others about my passion for the ocean and all of its creatures, but I told him that I would also be out at times of the year, since I also already agreed to sign on with a large oceanic research corporation, which for personal reasons shall remain unnamed. Due to my years of diving experience, especially since I had been certified as an advanced open water diver, I had also completed training and been certified to be capable of safely operating an atmospheric diving suit, or ADS for short. About 6 weeks ago, I was contacted by a fellow scientist, an old friend of mine, David Gimble. David Gimble and I had met at an oceanic conservation panel about 6 years ago, though his career had taken a vastly different direction than mine had. He'd been contracted by a private group that I had never heard of before to act as a consultant and the head diver of their underwater salvage and research division. He basically supervised the lower-down members of his team on locating long-forgotten shipwrecks, maintaining oil rig platforms, excavating underwater ruins, stuff of that nature, and he was allowed in return to use their diving suits and submersibles to conduct studies on deep-water species of fish and crustaceans in his off time. He told me that the group had heard about my merits and expertise, not only on working in deep water, but also about my secondary degrees in ancient languages, archaeology, and oceanography, and they were interested in signing me on to an expedition currently underway. Apparently, while trying to map the ocean floor for wrecks, their sonar systems had detected an unusual anomaly about 4,000 feet below the surface. They had passed over the anomaly a few times more, using an advanced system called side-scan sonar. Basically, for those who do not know much about mapping the seafloor, it works almost exactly like the sonar systems that you have in all boats, except you use a towfish, or a torpedo-shaped device that trolled behind the boat, which emits conical pulses towards the seafloor across a wide area perpendicular to the path of the sensor, and in basic terms, creates an image or map of the seafloor it passes over. When the team had reviewed the map created, they were shocked to see what appeared to be ruins on the bottom, across a 3-mile wide area. They had also discovered an American World War II battleship located less than half a mile from the ruins, dug sideways into the seafloor. To them, they had more or less hit the jackpot. A previously undiscovered shipwreck, which would net them a hefty financial discovery fee from the Navy. It would appear to be sunken ruins from some ancient civilization which had once been above the water. It's stuff people in their profession usually only dreamt about. Immediately, plans had been put in play to set down a deep ocean research station for scientists, biologists, and other assorted team members to be able to study both sites. I stopped him at that point and asked him why they would need either me or him, which both of us knew how to pilot submersibles and ROVs. Our forte was in ADS suits, and the deepest one could certainly go so far, and one was about 2,000 feet down, only halfway to the distance the sites were in. He leaned in, and in a hushed tone explained to me that the group had in almost absolute secrecy, with the exception of the appropriate agencies needed to certify and approve it for safety, developed an advanced version of the new exosuits that could withstand the pressures at over 5,000 feet underwater. They said they could theoretically keep you safe to 7,500 feet, he told me. But it's untested. He then proceeded to tell me that his group wanted me to lead the diving team to explore, film, catalog, and potentially bring to the surface some of the ruins for surface teams to study, while he would lead the team to work over the shipwreck. They would pay me handsomely for my time, in addition to being named as one of the head discoverers of whatever lay down there. I would become immortal in the history books for my findings as well. The amount of zeros Gimbal gave me would be on my paycheck, plus the opportunity to be remembered forever, went to my head immediately, and before he could even say anything else, I told him I would take their offer. Such a goddamn stupid decision. I was almost immediately afterward flown from the US to New Zealand, where I boarded the group's ship, the Oceanic Explorer, in Auckland, and spent almost a week heading out to our destination, which lay about 200 miles from the Pitcairn Islands. When we arrived, we were greeted by 5 other ships clustered around one area of sea, 2 belonging to the same company and 3 the Navy. They had rigged a platform that dangled between them, where the submersible could arrive, dock, and then disembark again into the depths. Once tied up with the other vessels, Gimbal and I were taken to a private briefing led by a man who clearly couldn't even fit into a diving suit if his life depended on it. No, he was clearly a topside leader. He sat us down, and after having us sign over a half a dozen non-disclosure agreements, to make sure we wouldn't blab to any reporters before they could announce their findings themselves, you can tell they had been fucked over before more than once by that problem, he showed us the map created by sonar. Both of us stared in almost utter shock at what we saw. They were definitely ruins, all right. They lay in many patterns, the innermost almost circular in pattern with outcroppings leading off in a straight direction. That was the biggest giveaway. Nature doesn't do such straight lines. He also pointed out that the battleship wreckage lying off the side, which David focused on, but I was too enthralled by what I saw to care. I studied every inch of the sonar image of those ruins, mentally mapping them into my mind, deducing where the best place to start my sweep would be. My mind was racing with endless possibilities as well. How old would they have to be to remain undiscovered for so long? Certainly I could understand why nobody had ever found them. We've only explored about 5% of the ocean so far, and anything could be hidden in that remaining 95%. After we'd finished with our regular briefing, the man named Lee Casey warned us that a tropical storm was brewing about 80 miles to the west of us, and was headed in our direction. He told us that if it didn't alter its course, the topside ships would have to pull out to a safer location until it passed. Which he said out here could take a couple of weeks. We'd also be out of radio contact with them as well, which meant if any emergency arose beneath the waves, all we'd have would be the onboard doctor, her staff, and her equipment. We both told him that we understood, that we'd make sure to keep ourselves and our team as safe as possible. After we were both ushered from the ship onto the platform, where a lone 3-man submersible waited to take us down, carrying only one duffel bag of clothing and personal belongings each, we squeezed into the tight interior, and the hatch was sealed. 2 safety divers swam around us, making final checks to be sure the submersible was ready for the descent. One approached the small window in the front and flashed the OK sign to our pilot. I craned my neck to catch a final glimpse of the orange sunset disappearing on the horizon, and then we slipped quietly below the waves and began our descent into the deep. There's a reason why the area of water where we were heading is dubbed the Midnight Zone. When you're down there, you're so far from the surface that no light can reach you, aside from the artificial lights of the sub, or the occasional flashes made by deep-sea creatures. There's nothing around you but blackness, an impenetrable darkness that almost seemed to reach out with vast, unseen clawed hands to wrap around you, like it wish to suffocate you in its unending embrace. Even when you've dove in water this deep 100 times, you still get an eerie, almost primal sense of fear looking out past where the light cannot reach, because you can't see what lurks just beyond the veil. I feel ashamed, like a little child afraid of monsters under the bed or in the closet, by saying that I felt a huge sense of relief when I spotted the station appearing beneath us. The darkness shooed away by dozens of lights mounted on and around it. I could see other divers, in what had to be the new exosuits, plodding around the outside of the base, setting up their final camera systems and setting down huge cases of equipment for the coming days and weeks of exploration and surveying. Our sub moved into position, hooked onto a hatch that would allow us to transfer from it into the base itself. After the water had been drained and the pressure equalized, the pilot unscrewed the hatch and opened it for us to climb through. He gave us a cheerful smile and a pat on the back as we climbed through. "Have a good stay, lads," he called after us with an Irish accent. "I'll be seeing you in about 6 or 7 weeks. Be safe." We both thanked him, and he sealed the hatch again, disconnecting himself from the station, and slowly began his long ascent back up to the surface, leaving the two of us to marvel at what we had stepped into. It was clear that tens of millions, if not billions of dollars, had been invested into designing the base. It had been placed directly between the two sites, and it was huge. Of course, it had to be to accommodate the number of people on our two teams, plus the 3 members of the medical staff. The entire structure had been made from a metal that could withstand the immense pressure pressing down on us from all sides. You could always hear the structure creak and groan as it won its endless battles with water outside. Right away, we were met by the base's leader, a tall, lanky man with hair that stuck out like the spines of a sea urchin named Carruthers. He showed us to our cabins to drop off our gear, then escorted us to the main observation area and operations room, located on the center of the base. There was a rather large dome window dominating the far wall, made out of extremely strong and durable plexiglass that allowed anyone in the room to look out at the work any divers in the immediate vicinity were doing, along with a bank of consoles on the opposite wall that showed the views of half a dozen cameras mounted outside, and also ones that were mounted on the shoulders of the exosuits. I took a glance out the window at the darkness, just out of the range of lights, and unwillingly shuddered before shaking my head and turning back to Carruthers and Gimble. "You're absolutely obsessed with the ocean, and have been almost as deep as this before," I chided myself. "You know better than most people what really lies in the gloom, so stop looking out there and letting your subconscious think up things that aren't there." Shaking the feeling from my mind, I focused in and listened to the man speak. He filled us in on what had been done so far. He'd set up the perimeter around the base and had also set up rope guides with light poles leading to both sites, but hadn't actually begun any surveying yet. They'd been instructed to wait on our arrival to begin the stage of work. We were to rest up, meet our respective teams when they returned from outside. Tomorrow, we would both set out on our respective paths to begin our initial sweep. We would each be in charge of 6 people plus ourselves. He told us that everyone had been handpicked by the group's board members for their qualifications and merits, and that they could all handle themselves under intense pressures and time constraints. All they needed were natural leaders, and that was us. He first walked David through the info they had acquired on the battleship, and this time, I chose to listen out of sheer curiosity. He said the ship had gone missing halfway through the war without a single trace. The last report had been that they were about to be battered by a huge storm, but their last known location was what baffled me. According to the declassified military records they'd been given by the Navy when the last known position had been transmitted, it was all the way up near the Philippines, thousands of miles away from here. My mind raced with confusion, trying to use reason and logic to come up with a sensible conclusion. How in the hell could they have been blown this far off course? I could understand they could have maybe been blown a few hundred miles from where they should, but this far? Surely they should have noticed, if not with their equipment, then at least by maps, the stars, the constellations. At least the fact there was no land for hundreds of miles. It couldn't make sense of it. The look on David's face told me he had the same thoughts. Carruthers explained that the U.S. Navy had been notified immediately about the wreck, and they had asked personally if it was photographed and documented for their records along with ours. He was the primary reason for their financial aid. They wanted to know what had caused the wreck as much as we did. After he finished, he turned to me and only said very brief words about my expedition. There wasn't really much he could say anyways. They had little to no information about the ruins other than what I had been told on the surface and the sonar map. He did say that he wanted my team and I to move very slowly, as nobody could tell how old they really were. After we finished documenting and cataloging everything where it lay, then we could begin to see if we could lift any pieces and bring them back to the base to study. I told him I understood. We were ready when he deemed it was time to go. Inside, though, I was bursting with excitement and giddiness of a child discovering a Native American arrowhead in a stream. Couldn't wait to get out of there and set foot in a place that nobody could have seen in thousands of years. Even still, and though I mentally kicked myself for the ridiculous emotions I felt, I still refused to turn and look out into the abyss until I left the room and closed the hatch behind me. That evening, we met everyone at dinner in the galley. My team was comprised of 4 men and 2 women: King, Alton, Figueroa, Brockman, Notting, and Carpenter. All of them were very experienced deep-sea divers. King, Brockman, and Notting were all commercial salvage divers. All 3 had worked together for over 10 years. You could easily tell that there were a distinct camaraderie between the 3 of them. Alton, Figueroa, and Carpenter were more along the lines of my work. Figueroa being a fellow marine biologist and oceanographer herself, and Alton and Carpenter had both graduated from Florida State with degrees in archaeology and oceanography, and were also accredited surveyors. We soon all struck up a friendly vibe from various discussions about our shared love of the water, of 80s horror movies, and various other subjects. And within an hour, we're laughing and joking like we'd known each other for years. I could see David had also won over his team, though I'd never gotten the time to properly learn any of their names. Now that I think about it, I never really learned any of their names, except for the few he ever said to me. We finished up eating and then each retired to our respective quarters to rest up for the huge undertaking we'd all be facing tomorrow. And while we may have all gone to sleep wishing the other pleasant dreams, with the exception of Figueroa being an apparent prankster, she snuck a rubber eel into Notting's bed, causing him to scream with an almost girly, high-pitched scream, which caused the rest of us to burst into uncontrollable laughter. I couldn't fall asleep peacefully. My mind was unable to shut down, and I tossed and turned all the while feeling like there were fingers running themselves around the inside of my head. I glanced at one of the only personal possessions I had brought with me on the metal table beside the bed, a framed photograph of a smiling face. Long, raven black hair, olive-colored skin, and emerald green eyes. A white smile beaming out from an amazingly happy moment. Jackie. I turned away, unwilling to let my mind dive down that road, and again felt that weird feeling like my skull was being massaged and probed around from within. For a moment, I swore I could almost hear her voice calling my name. Desmond. I shook it away, forcing myself to ignore it and fall asleep. Knowing what I do now, though, if I'd realized what it meant. I almost feel like I would have willingly walked to one of the diving airlocks and let the water rush in, drowning all of us. It would have been a death less horrific and painful than what they ended up with. We awoke early the next day, all buzzing with anticipation of what we were about to do. My team and I were directed into the east airlock, and David and his were sent to the west. We all helped one another into our suits, and one of the medical team checked to make sure they were all pressurized and sealed. They sealed the inner airlock and then flooded the room, pumping in seawater from outside. Once the room was completely filled, the outer hatch opened, and one by one, we slowly stepped out into the void. They had definitely done an amazing job on the exosuits. Can't deny that. They withstood the pressure outside perfectly and were only as slow and cumbersome as the older models were. Like the previous model, they were equipped with shoulder-mounted lights, built-in heating units to keep the freezing cold of the outside water at bay, and a remote camera mounted on the side of the helmet for Carruthers and the rest of the people inside to watch. Also brought over were 2 thrusters mounted on top of our oxygen canisters. They were controlled by joystick and switches inside the suit. Walking around on the bottom of the ocean is almost exactly like walking on the surface of the moon. It's extremely slow going, so the thrusters aid you in moving around at a faster pace. We made sure our comms were working, both between each of us and the base itself, and after quickly instructing my team to stay safe, take their time working, keep in constant communication, and most importantly to always work in teams of 2 and never wander off alone, we moved over to the equipment waiting for us near the beginning of the guide rope, picked it up, and then began our journey towards the ruins. The trip took us about 15 minutes to make. I was thankful for the guide rope and the lights that were spaced about 30 feet or so along the line, and after all, down here all it takes is a split-second one step into the darkness and you can easily become lost and disoriented. Your stories stretching as far back as the beginning of deep-sea diving of divers who became lost in the blackness, never to be seen again. It kept my gaze focused straight ahead of me, waiting to see my first glimpse of the reason I had been brought down here. A few minutes later, I was rewarded for my vigilance. Holy Jesus, Mother of God, I heard Figaro almost breathe. The sonar map hadn't been able to properly show the enormity of the site. The first stone pillars we saw, covered with ages of muck, algae, and growth, rose high above our heads, almost to the point that the top of them were out of sight in the gloom provided by the final guide light. We knew there were more beyond it, just out of sight, but the thought of all of this covered an almost 3-mile-wide stretch of ocean floor was almost incomprehensible to my brain. I was almost awestruck. My entire team was as well. I shook my head to clear it. We had a job to do today, and only about 9 or 10 hours of oxygen to get it done. I turned back to my team and gave them their tasks of the day to perform. We would all work as one unit at first, setting up lights in and around the inner portion of the site to be able to properly see what we were doing. Once that was finished, Alton and Carpenter would begin their surveying duties, using a remotely operated variation of the side-scan sonar system to give us a 3-dimensional map of the entire site, which would then be transmitted back to the base for us to look over at the end of the day. While they were doing that, the remaining 5 of us would divide into teams of 2 to do an initial sweep of the area, shooting video and taking still photographs for documentation. We would do other tasks, including trying to date the ruins another day. With my instructions finished, along with a reminder to stay safe and alert, we began work. With the 7 of us working in tandem, we were able to set up the lights in less than 2.5 hours, and when we finished, the darkness had been banished away. The ocean forced to reveal what it had kept hidden for so long. It was absolutely incredible. Somehow, even after all this time, despite the ocean currents and the crushing embrace, almost all the pillars had remained intact, save for a select few that had crumbled into large piles of stone. Alton and Carpenter had already begun their survey. You could easily hear the whirring of the sensors as it wound its way through the ancient structures. Occasionally, you could see the bright yellow machine move slowly over your head as they joked with each other and made bets about who would win an upcoming baseball game they would miss. Meanwhile, we had each teamed up and moved slowly down the rows of pillars towards the circular center. I had chosen to have Figueroa partner with me. Not only had she and I developed the best rapport of everyone, but in my professional opinion, she seemed the most centered, calm, and astute of the rest of us. We each took a side and filmed and photographed pillars every couple of feet, getting closer to where all converged, maintaining constant radio contact with each other and the other groups. About halfway down, she called me over to her side. "Take a look at this, Windows," she said, and proceeded to use the claw hand of her suit to rub away the muck as gently as possible. For a second, I couldn't distinguish a damn thing. But then I realized what she had spotted. There were images carved deeply into the stone. Some were pictures, others were what I could only assume were hieroglyphs, or an ancient language I couldn't read. I didn't need to, though. The carved pictures were sufficient enough to explain themselves. Depicted on the small portion of exposed stone that I could see was what I can only describe as something truly monstrous. The creature was gargantuan in size, with the head of a wolf eel, one gigantic black eye staring directly at the viewer, and an almost humanoid body covered in what appeared to be black scales. It reached towards the surface with webbed, clawed hands for what looked like a tribal boat. Its occupants cowered in fear at their sealed fate. Around its torso swam smaller creatures, what had to be underlings of the monstrosity. They too appeared to be humanoid in shape, but with the heads of viper fish atop their shoulders. Their huge razor-sharp maws poised open to catch the unfortunate victims that managed to avoid death from their leader. I scraped away algae from the carving underneath and shuddered softly at the next image. The huge creature had dragged the entire ship down to the bottom of the ocean and was slowly torturing its drowning victims. Limbs had been torn off, and a clear expression of malicious glee adorned its inhuman features. Still, others were being torn to shreds by the smaller monsters. The carving was so detailed that I could see individual expressions of horror and pain eternally frozen on each person's face. "My God," I heard Figueroa say next to me. I shook my head. "I'm as much of a science man as you can be, Liza. But that..." I closed my eyes. The images burned into the back of my eyelids. The furthest thing from God you could possibly get. I opened my eyes again, raised my camera, snapped off a few shots of the carvings, then turned away in almost desperate need to get away from whatever ancient civilization had conjured up that beast overwhelming me. Come on. Get to the center and finish up today's work. The circular center was absolutely massive. We estimated that it had to be almost a mile and a half across from the end of one row of pillars to the beginning of another on the far side. Here and there we could see some smaller formations rising up to about chest height at varying distances. But for the most part, it was flat, save for an odd spiral that had been carved into the smooth stone, deep enough that the outline could still be seen when you dropped down onto it. You could feel the dips, even through the ages of mud and muck that had accumulated over it. We all moved out to a distance of about 5 feet from one another, as a team slowly moved across the other side. We were about halfway across when I heard nodding, let out a shout of surprise, followed by curses. "Everyone stop!" I called. "Nodding, you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine," was the muttered reply I received. I needed more information, though. When you're working deep underwater, one small mistake can cost a diver's life. "What happened?" I pressed. After a few seconds of silence, he answered. "Goddamn gulper eel suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Come straight for my face, caught me off guard. I stumbled back into a rock formation. Nothing's damaged on my suit. I just finished checking." I let out a sigh of relief as the rest of the group burst out into laughter. "Oh, were you afraid you were going to be swallowed whole?" Brockman said in a sing-songy voice, trying to lighten the mood. Everybody laughed harder, myself, and even nodding joining in. It helped loosen the sudden burst of tension that had fallen over us for that split second after all. Even from 15 feet away, I could see the sheepish expression that he wore through his faceplate. "I just got startled to hell and back, that was all," he said in return. He sighed. "Hate to say this, Windows. I'm sorry, but when I backed into that formation, I knocked it over." I thrust around to the others to inspect the damage. He was right. A small pillar had indeed been knocked over. It lay on its side, a small shroud of muck settling around it. It still looked to be in one piece, however. "It's okay, Nodding. It didn't break at all. Just fell on its side. You're safe from being chewed out by me or Carruthers." He let out a relieved sigh, and then looked down at the gauges lined the inside of his suit. "Thank Christ, we got 2 hours of oxygen remaining, boss. You want to finish up surveying this area and head back to base?" I didn't answer him right away. However, I was staring down at where the pillar had clearly been knocked out from. There was a slot there, a rectangular opening about 3 or 4 feet across. But it didn't seem to only go down a few inches or even a few feet. The blackness in that space seemed greater, almost as if there was a space much larger and deeper beneath it. I felt the same odd sensation in my head again, this time a little stronger, and for a split second I was overcome with a desire to peer into the slot, to even swim into it. It was almost as if something had hooked itself into my brain and was trying to reel me in. I was snapped out of my moment by Brockman calling my name. "Windows?" she asked tentatively. I looked up at everyone. They all wore puzzled, confused expressions on their faces as they stared at me. Shaking away the last tendrils of my insane thought, I pulled myself together. "Yeah, you're right, Nodding. Let's finish this area and be done for the day." The next 3 weeks proceeded without incident for my own team, as well as David's. We both made very good progress on our respective sites, cataloging and documenting extensively. The feeling that I'd had during that first dive hadn't returned since, and I felt more like myself, more eager to learn all we could about the ruins. The surface team had contacted us 2 days ago and informed us that the storm was almost on top of us, so they would have to pull back until the storm either passed by or blew itself out. They did, however, authorize us to bring back a few pieces of the site to further study, very selectively chosen 3 smaller ones, using commercial lift bags to float them back to the base. Once inside, they had been brought to the lab for us to clean up and study. There had been more carvings depicting the same monster as I'd seen in the carving I examined the first time, along with what we now were sure had to be a very ancient language. Using specialized scanning equipment, we had put it into a computer and had set it to attempt to translate to English. So far, it had been running for almost 3 days with no success. We headed back out in the meantime to document the outer edges of the site, one of what we assumed to be our final initial passes. We had again divided up into teams of 2, and had fanned out over a distance of about 100 feet from the next team. This time around, I'd paired up with Carpenter, who'd volunteered to help me photograph and film the end of one particular row of pillars. We were about halfway done with our job when I noticed a glint of something red and metallic, reflecting off the glow of the nearest light. I turned, and I felt my jaw drop open. What in the absolute fuck? I was staring at a tricycle. A goddamn red children's tricycle sitting perfectly upright on the bottom, not even 20 feet from me. Confusion filled my mind. How in the hell did that get down here? I narrowed my eyes and tried to think of a logical explanation. It could have fallen off someone's boat as it passed over the area, but there were 2 things that seemed wrong to me. If it had fallen off someone's boat, it had to have been very freaking soon. It had all of its paint on it. There was absolutely no signs of rust. Not to mention that there was not even a tiny bit of algae covering it. But more unsettling than that was the creeping sensation I felt. That tricycle. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it looked familiar. Almost as if I'd seen it before, somewhere. Trying to shake off the odd feeling, I turned and called the carpenters back. Hey, Sean, would you fucking look at this? I just found an honest-to-God tricycle down here on the... I trailed off as I turned back. It was gone. It had vanished into thin air, or in this case, thin water. I blinked a couple of times, trying to rationalize with my own mind. What the... I shook my head hard, then looked down at my gauges, suddenly concerned with my own safety. Am I developing NN, a nitrogen narcosis? It's a reversible, but at these depths, a very dangerous altercation in the consciousness caused by the anesthetic effect of certain gases at high pressure, which comes with a variety of symptoms, one of which includes auditory and visual hallucinations. To combat this, we were using a mixture of helium and oxygen in our air supply, but at these previously unventured depths with diving suits, I wonder if the mixture wasn't potent enough to ward off the onset. You say something, boss? I heard Carpenter call behind me. Still trying to come back to a conclusion in my own mind, I decided not to tell him what I'd seen. Not yet, anyway. No, nothing, man, I called back. For another minute or so, I gazed out into the darkness, trying to piece together jigsaw puzzles in my mind to figure out if we should head back or not. Just in case my assumptions were correct, I decided I'd be better to be safe than sorry. Hey, Sean, let's round up the others. Head back to the base. Something's not right here. He didn't answer me. I turned, my worry giving way to a small twinge of annoyance. Did you hear me, Matt? Carpenter was gone. There was absolutely no trace that he'd ever been there except for his bag of gear, which lay untouched where he'd put it down. What the shit? I looked down the row of columns to see if I could see the orange-yellowish outline of his suit, or the beam of his shoulder lights. Nothing. Where the hell did he go? Couldn't have slipped away that quietly. The thrusters make too much sound to do that. And unless he's somehow mastered running away underneath an 800-pound diving suit, he couldn't have disappeared on foot. Confusion gave way to the first tendrils of worry. I looked up at the nearest team to me, which was Figaro and Brockman. Hey guys, I called out in a voice that shook a little. Did either of you see Carpenter pass by you? They both looked over in confusion at me. No, isn't he with you? I didn't answer. Worry had begun to be crept up on by the first real tendrils of fear. I tried to keep my mind in check. I had to control myself. All of my team were counting on me to get them back safely, but in my mind, I couldn't help it. The memory shot back to a painting I'd purchased for my house about 3 years ago. A painting of a deep-sea diver in an old-school suit, light emanating from his helmet, as dozens of huge tentacles appeared behind him out of the gloom, ready to snatch him into an eternal embrace and drag him backwards to a watery grave. I spun around to face the darkness that I had turned my back to, almost half expecting to see that very sight before me, but there was nothing there, just blackness. By this time I could hear the rest of my team churning up a frenzy over the comms. They had all heard me and were now calling out, trying to get Carpenter to reply to them. But to no avail. Carruthers was also trying to cut through the barrage of voices, trying to understand what was going on. Sheer panic and chaos had suddenly come crashing down on all of us. Pulling myself together, I summoned all the emotional strength I could muster. "Shut up!" I yelled, as loud as I could into the mic. The jumble of voices ceased immediately. Quickly, I relayed to Carruthers what had happened and asked him what the best course of action would be to take, with the knowledge that we only had about an hour and a quarter of air remaining. He was quiet for a moment and then gave the order for us to search for our missing teammate for 15 minutes, no longer, then get our asses back to the base on the double. Copy that, I told him, and then told the rest of my team to gather up in my position. As one, we made our way through the ruins for the next 15 minutes, calling out over the comms, trying to get a response from Carpenter. But we found no trace of him at all. It was as if he'd been wiped from existence. With a vice grip around my heart and an unshakable feeling of dread coursing through me, I gave the order at 15 minutes for the rest of us to head back and stay close to each other. As we began our way back along the guideline, I swear that it felt like the darkness held at bay around us by the lights seemed to creep just a little bit closer, as if testing to see if it could reach us. Okay, so before I transcribe these final few pages, I need to say that this will be my very last post about the buoy and the pages themselves. I didn't expect anyone to realize what I was up to so quickly, but I was woken up this morning by a knock at my door. When I answered it, I was met by one of the men who had been at the dock the day the buoy was taken by the Navy. He stated he'd only come to ask a few follow-up questions, such as what our location was when we caught it in our nets, what the tides were like, and so on. I knew it was a bunch of bullshit. It was information he could have gotten from my captain. He knew that I knew it as well. That's when he not so subtly began threatening me, speaking about prison time, and worse for leaking, as he put it, confidential documents before leaving. I'm currently packing my suitcase and leaving a message for my real estate agent to talk to her to list my house for sale, along with one to my captain, telling him I won't be showing up anymore. I'm not sticking around, and as soon as I post this, I'm gonna just get into my truck and drive. I'm gonna disappear, and I'm going to stop somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to burn the copies of the pages I have. Besides, I don't think I can wake up and look out at the ocean anymore. Here are the final pages. When we got back to base, we found even more chaos when we left. As we exited the airlock, Figueroa and King supported Brockman, who was now hysterically crying. I heard confused and angry shouting coming from the operations room. Instructing Brockman be brought to the medical bay to have her checked out, I removed myself and my team and headed towards the half-open hatches to see what the commotion was about. When I pushed open the door, I saw David, standing inches from Carruthers' face. His face a mask of panic and rage. "The hell's going on out there?" he almost screamed. I hurried to get in between the two of them, in case my old friend ended up losing his temper enough to physically assault our commander. Pushing them apart, I turned my head to look at both of them. Whoa, what in the name of God is going on? David looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I never had before. It made me feel uneasy. There was a mixture of pure animalistic fear and defensive anger there. He began to shout again, but I grabbed him by the shoulders. "Calm yourself, Dave. Yelling isn't going to help anything right now. Take a deep breath and tell me what happened." He bent almost in half for a moment, trying to suck in deep breaths of air before standing up and telling me. 3 of the 6 members of his team were gone. He'd been exploring the wreck, discovered a massive fissure in its hull, almost as if it had steamed headlong into a reef. They were documenting the apparent cause of its sinking, when a strong rush of water had caught him and the 3 others in his team, picking them up off the ocean floor, almost flinging them over a dozen yards from where they'd been. Sea floor had also been kicked up, making visibility difficult to see. When they'd been able to make it back to the side of the wreck, the other 3 were just... they were gone. There was no trace of them at all, almost exactly like what happened with Carpenter. I turned to Carruthers and asked him if there was anything at all about the 2 sites that he knew that we didn't. He insisted that he had no knowledge he was withholding from us. I felt too emotionally drained to try and push the issue, so I turned to my colleague and in as calm a voice told him that there was no use in fighting that didn't use up unnecessary energy, and we needed to keep our heads level, if not for our own sake, then the rest of us. He looked at me hard for a long moment, and then he nodded, before turning and heading back through the hatch. With the situation diffused, I turned back to Carruthers. Has the storm above us blown out or passed over yet? Do we have any contact at all with the surface? He rubbed his hands over his eyes. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 20 minutes. No, he said wearily. The storm was still directly over our heads, and though he'd tried the emergency long-wave radio, he had received no response. Until it passed, we were completely cut off. I rubbed my own eyes and then told him that until we could reestablish communication with the surface team, it'd be safer if no one else went outside. He agreed, then turned and slumped into his chair, his body sagging with the weight that had now fallen on his shoulders. I left him alone, glancing back at his back. Despite my own grief and fear, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for the man. He'd be the only one who bore the brunt of the flame for this, since he was the commanding officer on the station. I shook my head and I exited, closing the hatch behind me, and hurried to check on Brockman. Thankfully, she'd only suffered a minor emotional breakdown and had given a light sedative to help her sleep. The rest of the teams were instructed to go and get some rest, and one by one, they filed out of the medbay. Their expressions all a clear mix of anxiety and fear. Letting them go, I decided it would be best if I spoke to the head doctor about what I'd seen out there. Pulling her aside, I described in detail the moments leading up to Carpenter's disappearance, along with the thoughts that I'd been having. She listened intently, and then commended me for my rational thinking. She did agree that I could have been affected by an early onset of nitrogen narcosis, and took 2 blood samples to check, see if our hypothesis was correct. As I left, she also informed me that the computer in the research lab had beeped once, indicating a partway translation success. I thanked her, and then headed to the lab to check before resting myself. Entering the dimly lit room, I crossed to the computer, shook the mouse to bring it out of hibernation mode. The screen came to life and glowed brightly. The one word it had depicted proclaimed in big, black letters, "Away." As I turned to leave, a voice from the other side of the lab made me nearly jump out of my skin. Desmond. Whirling to face whoever had said my name, I found Figueroa, sitting at the examination table, one of the carvings laying in front of her. "Good God, Liza, gave me a heart attack, why don't you?" I said, leaning against the wall to steady myself. She gave me a small, strange smile. "Sorry, I thought you'd seen me." I held up a hand in the universal sign of it's okay. "What are you still doing up? You should be trying to get some rest like the others." She motioned for me to join her at the table. I walked over. "My mind's still racing too much to try to sleep, at least yet," she said, and then gestured to the carving. Have a look at the depictions in this. With a quick glance at her, I pulled on a pair of sterile gloves and gently pulled it towards me. This the carving they're trying to translate? I asked. No, not this one, she replied. That's over there. She pointed to the scanning machine behind the computer, where a large black cylindrical machine whirred softly. She continued. Remember the giant monster and its underlings that we'd seen depicted on many of the other carvings? Well, if you look here. She pointed to a section which showed what appeared to be them in combat with other creatures. It appears they were locked into some sort of underwater siege with the beings here, she finished. And I looked closer. I could see the giant eel-headed creature looming behind its underlings, pointing with one of its clawed hands like a general commanding its troops. On the other side were what appeared to be creatures that, as close as you could come to describe them, were mermaids. They were humanoid in shape with more human-like features than the adversaries, but still contained fish-like features, large, fish-like eyes and mouths containing sharp teeth were the biggest giveaways. Behind them stood what had to be their leader, who was equal in stature to the eel monster. The biggest difference between him and his soldiers was the fact that a giant pair of tusks protruded from his mouth, and a single eye dominated his upper face. I looked at Figueroa. So, do you know who won the battle? I asked. She shook her head. No, but if you look here, she pointed to a symbol similar to the inner spiral of a nautilus shell, seemingly tattooed on the tusk leader's chest. I've seen this symbol on many of the ruins we've studied. It suggests the ruins are theirs, or at least the people who worship them, not theirs. She gestured at the eel creature. I ran my fingers over the carvings, taking it all in. Interesting. We'll have to cross-reference it against any other known ancient civilizations in the area, see if there's any bleeding over their myths. I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my wrist gently. That's not all, she said softly, before rotating the ruin over to reveal the other side. After a second of staring at it, my eyes grew wide. I jerked my head to look up at her. She simply nodded. My voice shook uncharacteristically. How is that possible? Depicted on this side of the ruin, which almost appeared to be in much better, much newer condition, was a carving of what appeared to be the eel-headed monster, pulling down a battleship, while the tusked creature attempted to stop him. A World War II battleship, and more to the point, it looked almost exactly like the wreck which David's team had found and had been exploring. Both leaders' underlings swarmed under and around them. The viperfish-headed ones attempted to dismember and devour the drowning sailors, while the mermaid-looking creatures attempted to save them. Liza, how is that even possible? I asked again, almost in a whisper. She shook her head gently. I don't know, she said softly. I held her gaze for a moment, then pulled off my gloves and stepped around the table. I took a deep breath and then spoke over my shoulder. You should try to get some sleep. I will, she said. Soon. As I went to exit, I turned and asked her one final question. If that battle depicted is the newest carving in terms of age, then what does that mean? What happened to what appeared to be, for all intents and purposes, the side of good in these battles? Figueroa looked up from the ruin, answering me seriously. Maybe they lost. Trying to ignore the growing feeling of insects crawling under my skin, I shook my head and left the lab for my cabin. I wouldn't be able to fully understand the message until the rest had been deciphered and translated, and until then, all I could do was chase shadows and scare myself. Same went for the carvings. As I entered my cabin, a flash of a thought entered my mind. I remembered why that tricycle I'd sworn I'd seen had looked so familiar. It was almost identical to the one I'd played around on in my parents' front yard as a kid. I mean, if I didn't know any better, knock it off, Desmond. No way it could have been the same. Things just don't pop out of your mind into the real world. Lying down on my bunk, I glanced around at the photo on the table, reached out and caressed the cheek delicately. "Jackie, please, wherever you are, babe, help me get through this," I whispered. Then rolled over, pulled the thin sheet up to my shoulders, forcing my eyes closed, and soon fell into a restless sleep. A sleep perturbed by nightmares of Carpenter and the 3 members of David's team screaming in the dark void as if they were being skinned, torn apart, and eaten alive. "Desmond." I rolled over in my bunk, fighting back the waking world. I grunted. "Desmond, darling." I pulled myself partway out of my slumber. "Yeah, Jackie, what is it, babe?" I mumbled, trying to get comfortable. We really needed a new bed in the house. This one was getting old and uncomfortable, almost like there was metal underneath. I shot straight up as though I'd been zapped with electricity, reality slamming into my brain and reminding me that I wasn't sleeping in my own bed at home in Coos Bay. I was almost a mile underneath the ocean, and Jackie wasn't anywhere near here. Jackie wasn't anywhere anymore, not for 4 years. My breath came in huge, ragged gasps, cold sweat coursing down my body. You couldn't have heard that. It was part of your dream. You didn't actually hear her voice. That's what I kept repeating to myself over and over, willing the mantra to sink in. After a minute or so, I started to believe it. Forced myself to lie back down. I turned back onto my side and began to close my eyes again, where a loud, piercing scream suddenly rang out from the corridor. My mind reacted faster than my body could relay information, and I flew out of bed, promptly tripping over the sheet that had entangled itself around my legs, rubbing my head where it hit the grated floor. I stumbled back to my feet and raced out into the hall. Everyone's hatches were open, and frightened faces all peered around the edges. All except one. I rushed from my cabin towards Brockman's half-closed door and yanked it open. She lay there, quivering, back against the corner of her bed that was nearest the wall, her knees pulled up against her chest and her head tucked in them. I slowly crossed the room and I knelt in bed in front of her. "Brockman." She didn't respond. I tried using her first name. "Tish. What happened?" A muffled reply came from between her knees, which I couldn't hear. "What?" She raised her head slightly, not enough to reach my eyes, and this time I heard her clear enough to understand, though her voice was muffled, still muffled slightly from the mucus freely flowing from her nose and over her lips, giving it almost a burble. "I heard him." A shiver passed down my spine, though I couldn't understand why. "Heard him? Who's him? Who did you hear?" I asked gently. She raised her head completely, now meeting my gaze. She wore a look of almost petrified terror in place of the usual relaxed and happy expression I'd grown to know and care about. Her voice trembled furiously. "I heard Sean calling out my name in the dark, asking why we left him there. He said... She choked back a sob and finished her sentence, her voice rising into a shrill scream. He said what happened to him was nothing compared to the end we would receive, that we all end up dying here in this base, screaming in the dark. I stared in shock and sadness at her. She was completely going over into the deep end. Losing her close friend had absolutely shattered her psyche. She was beginning to hear things. I made my voice as soothing as possible. Reaching out and gently putting a hand on her shoulder, she flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Tish, it's okay. Nobody else is going to die down here. We're all going to make it back up top as soon as the storm clears. You didn't hear Sean. You're mentally scarred from losing your friend. It'll be all right. She pulled her head back up again to look at me, and I pulled back sharply at what I saw. The look on her face had changed. She no longer looked terrified. It had been replaced by a look of almost complete insanity. A smile crossed slowly over her lips, but this wasn't a happy smile. In fact, it made her look almost demonic in the low light. The small giggle escaped her, and her eyes burned holes into mine. That's not all he said to me. He also said that you have a fate worse than any of ours. He's taken a special interest in you because you're so damn smart and you have such inner strength. She giggled again. It's going to take its time with you, Desmond. It's going to leave you for last, and you'll scream longer and worse than we ever did. And with that, she collapsed into unconsciousness. I slowly stood up and moved away from the figure on the bed. I knew that she hadn't been right when she had said those things, that her cracking mind had simply thought them up from a very dark place, and yet I couldn't help but feel unrelenting chills pass through my body. Her words had wound their way past my rational thinking and into the deepest corners of my own mind, and they were repeating themselves there, making me feel as though I were continuously being doused in ice water. I backed out of the cabin, allowing the medical team to enter and take her to the med bay to keep an eye on her. Turning on the rest, I found them all staring at me. Some of their faces confused. On others, fear. Figueroa locked eyes with me as I scanned the group. I nodded at her and tried to keep the shake out of my voice. It's over with, guys. Let's try to get a few more hours of sleep. We need it. And with that, I walked back into my cabin. Brockman's words echoed in my brain. You'll scream longer and worse than we ever will. Trying to push it away, I laid back down again and closed my eyes, willing myself to fall back asleep, and trying to ignore the voice of my dead wife, calling to me from somewhere in my subconscious. Desmond? No, not listening. You're not there, you're only in my head. Desmond. Still not listening. Desmond! I shot up in my bunk. That voice had been one of the team. It came again. Desmond, wake up and get in here. I stumbled to my feet, careful to make sure I didn't trip again on the sheets, and ran barefoot into the corridor. I recognized the voice now. It belonged to King, and it was coming from the operating room. Flying through the open hatch, I turned and saw him staring into the bank of monitors that showed the external views from the cameras mounted on the exterior of the base. Joining him, my breath was wrenched from me like a knife had just pierced my lungs. On the screen from the camera facing out from above the eastern airlock was an image we couldn't possibly be seeing. Tell me you're seeing that too, Windows, King said in a voice that shook slightly. I could only nod in response. There was a diver out there. Whoever it was standing with their back towards the camera, but we could tell it was one of our own dive suits. I asked him to zoom in on the lower part of the thruster assembly. Each individual diver had their name stamped on their respective suits to avoid confusion. We'd all be able to tell who it was. As the letters came into focus, both of us let out our breaths in a huge gasp. That's Carpenter, King whispered after a moment. I kept on blinking my eyes, willing for the letters to change, but they remained the same. That's fucking impossible, I said. He would have run out of air more than 10 hours ago. There's absolutely no way he could possibly still be alive. He looked over at me, his eyes showing that he was trying to make sense of what was before us, but unable to. Then how in the hell did his body float all the way back here? I couldn't think of anything to respond with. Even though I'd wanted to, I couldn't. Carruthers, Figueroa, and Nodding must have heard King's shouts because they entered the room. Figueroa rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked sheepishly. "Yeah," Nodding echoed. "What's up?" His eyes grew wide as he saw what we were looking at on the screen. "Carpenter," he breathed out. Carruthers moved in between me and King quickly. "He couldn't have survived this long out there, could he?" he asked me quietly. I gave my head an almost imperceptible shake, just enough for him to notice. He stared again at the monitor, then turned back to the other two. "Guys, I'm sorry to have to be the one to say this, but..." He was cut off by Figueroa, who was pointing towards the screen we were now all facing away from. "Oh my God, he's alive!" she yelped. We all swiveled back towards the screen, but the suit was in the same place it had been when I'd seen it. I turned back. "Liza," I began gently, but Nodding cut in. "No, she's right. I saw the suit's arm lift up as well. He's alive." Carruthers, King, and I tried to quiet the two of them. We could hear the rest of the group coming down the corridor, but suddenly Nodding was a blur of motion running towards the hatch and beyond. The airlock. "He's alive, damn it!" he screamed. "I'm not leaving him to die out there!" Carruthers tried running after him. Nodding was trying to pull the hatch closed when he grabbed the handle. "Evan, don't be fucking stupid!" he yelled. The hatch reversed direction quickly, smashing him in the head and knocking him on his back. Figueroa and I rushed in to check on him. Blood was seeping from a newly formed gash just below his hairline. One of the doctors poked their head through the door. "What the hell's going on?" he asked incredulously. I snapped my head up from the half-unconscious man. "For God's sake, stop him!" I screamed. Everybody turned to look away, and I heard the airlock close and seal itself on the inside. I leapt up, leaving Carruthers to be held by Figueroa, and ran to the airlock door. Looking through the small porthole, I saw that Nodding was already getting into his suit and sealed it. I pounded on the metal latch. "Carpenter's fucking dead, you idiot!" But he either didn't hear me yell through the thick door, or simply ignored me. I saw him reach out with one clawed hand and smash the manual activation switch on the wall. The sound of the hatch filling with water filled my ears, and I screamed the same sentence I had already said as the water rose over the porthole, begging that it would knock some sense into him, but it didn't. He reached down, turned the handle with both claws, and then thrust it out of the airlock. I turned and ran back into the now crowded observation room, almost smashing into the monitors as I frantically searched the screens for the one that was linked to his suit-mounted camera. Finally, I found it in the lower right-hand corner. He was on the bottom now, using a short thrust to close the distance between himself and the suit. I searched for the button to establish comms with his suit and stabbed it when I found it. Gripping the microphone tightly, tried to speak in as calm of a voice as I could muster. "Evan, please listen to me. Please come back to the airlock." "No, Desmond. He's alive," he replied defiantly in a small burst of static. Evan, please. Listen to common sense. Carpenter has been out there for over 14 hours. He only had enough air for 8. He can't possibly be alive. Please, I'm begging you. You don't want to see what's in there. But he ignored me. I heard him calling out over the open comms channel. "Hey, Sean, buddy," he called out. The still form less than 8 feet in front of him didn't reply. "Sean, buddy, thank God you made it back," he pressed on. "I'm sorry we left you out there, man, but we couldn't find you. Please turn around, come back inside with me. We'll help you feel better." Still, nothing but silence. But nodding suddenly continued on as though he'd received an answer. "Why can't you turn around, man?" My brow furrowed in confusion. I felt the same shiver that had passed through me when Brockman had made her insane declaration return. I glanced away from the screen and was greeted by the same look of uneasiness in the rest of them. I was brought back to the screen when I heard him speak again. "Why didn't I think before that you wouldn't be almost completely frozen by now? Of course. I'll help you turn around, pull you back inside." He was now directly behind the suit, and I saw him reach out a claw and hook onto its arm tether. In that moment, I also noticed something else, something that turned my blood to ice and almost completely tore away the sanity from my mind. A pale, webbed, clawed hand gently holding onto the side of the suit, just below the waist, as if keeping it in place. I snatched for the microphone to scream for Nodding not to touch the suit, but it was already too late. He'd gripped the tether and slowly began to turn it towards him. Just before the front of the suit came into view, his screen cut off in static. A split second later, so did all the cameras facing the eastern side of the base. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the room as we were staring at the static-filled screens, and then it was shattered by the sound that almost leapt out of the speakers. Nodding had begun to scream, the same high-pitched scream, almost girly scream that he had made when he discovered the rubber eel Figueroa had put in his bed. Only this time there was nothing funny about this scream at all. It never wavered at all. He never drew in a breath to continue screaming. It was simply one long, unending scream. One filled with more horror and pain than I'd ever heard anyone filled with before. It was so loud that it almost drowned out anything that was happening in the background. Almost. There was another sound that was barely audible underneath that almost inhuman wail, and it rooted me to the spot and drained all the blood from my face. It was the sound of something tearing apart his suit. For a split second, it was replaced by the sound of flesh tearing from bone, and then the sound of the ocean rushing into his suit overwhelmed it. Nodding's scream became muffled through the water for another second, and then abruptly cut off. Salt water short-circuiting his comm link and filling the speakers with nothing but static. I stood, rigid, the hairs all along my body standing up on end, my mind trying to make sense of the horror that I'd just witnessed, and I slowly turned back to the rest of the group. Their faces all held the same ashen, terrified expression I knew my own face held. And then I heard the voice again. Her voice. "Desmond." I closed my eyes and I pressed my hands to my temples, attempting to force away the voice of the love of my life, who had died 4 years ago in a boating accident. But this time it didn't go away. "Desmond." I opened my eyes as I felt the stinging sensation of hot tears forcing their way out of my tear ducts, and saw all of the others also holding their hands to their heads. A few of them fell to their knees and curled up into the tight balls. "Mother?" I heard King let out a pained voice. At the same time, Carruthers, who had pulled himself back into consciousness, was leaning against the hatch, his face contorted into a face I had worn at my wife's funeral. Total anguish. "Abigail," he whimpered. "So sorry that Daddy couldn't protect you. Please forgive me." The realization hit me like a freight train in that instant, connecting the soul-piercing pieces together in one jigsaw puzzle, and I wish my mind couldn't have been able to solve. The voice in my head and the ones the others were hearing, the disappearance of Carpenter, the members of David's team, the storm overhead, sunken battleship not torn apart by a reef but by something. A tricycle, my childhood tricycle, plucked out of my memories, shown to me, the carvings on the pillars of the monstrosities, ruins that I now knew had never seen the surface in their entire existence. The single word that had been translated from the language on the stone that we'd brought back, the piece that nodding had knocked over, and the almost endless darkness that had lain beneath it. A prison. It all fit. It all completely shattered my view of reality. Oh God. What have we done? At the same time, I heard a sound from out of the corridor, loud enough to be heard over the whispering voices that wouldn't go away. It was one that sent the same ice water sensation through my body and almost caused me to piss myself. The sound of the other airlock door closing and something lumbering over towards the drain cycle switch. Whatever spell had been keeping me in this place shattered, and I flew past everyone in the corridor toward the inner hatch. Whatever had killed Nodding. You know exactly what killed Nodding, Desmond. Jackie's voice cooed inside my head. Its tone now shifted from the tone I lovingly remembered to one that was terrifyingly sinister. Had made its way into the airlock and was now trying to get inside the base, and we would all be dead if it was able to. I slammed into the hatch, staring through the porthole. And in that instant, all semblance of sanity fled my body from what I saw. The fractured mind was only able to take in two details. The head, that awful head that looked exactly like that of a viperfish, which turned to stare at me with one large bulbous eye, with a mouth that, even though had no lips, seemed to turn from a threat display into a leering grin of what I could only describe as pure evil and malice, and clutched in one webbed, clawed hand. Oh, dear God. Was Nodding's severed head, his face eternally frozen with the same look of horror and pain that had been bestowed upon the poor souls in the carvings, the last drops of blood dripping from the torn flaps of skin below his neck where it had once connected to his body. I screamed as loud as I could for anyone to come help me keep the hatch closed. For a second, there was no reply at all, and I felt myself deflate inside. They were all still in their own personal hell, haunted by the voices placed in their heads. No, pulled out of their heads and didn't hear me. The water was almost completely drained from the airlock, and though I didn't glance through the porthole again, I knew it was coming closer to the hatch, reaching to yank the wheel out of my grasp and come inside to begin its slaughter. I could hear its wheezing gasps. I screamed one last time, a scream more of defiance than help. Then three shapes smashed into the hatch on either side of me. Figueroa, Alton, and King had somehow snapped out of their trance and made their way over to me. "We have to seal the hatch," Figueroa screamed. "How?" "There's a manual lock on the door you need to press," Alton yelled. "Where?" I yelled back. "It's right below your left knee," King interjected. I swung my gaze down as I felt the wheel beginning to turn from my grasp as it began to spin and unlock, spying the large black button to set low on the door. I let go and let my own weight simply bring myself to my knees as I heard the loud click of the hatch being unlocked and slammed the button with my fist as hard as I could, begging to a God I hadn't believed in since childhood that I'd hit it in time. Manual east airlock sealed, activated, a robotic voice said from somewhere behind me. The wheel spun itself back into the lock position, and I could hear the creature let out a loud hissing sound, though whether it was out of pain or defeat, I couldn't tell. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief as reinforced bolts slammed into position. Feeling victorious, I stood up, not staring into the porthole again, but aiming my voice into it. "Fuck you, you stupid scaly son of a bitch!" I yelled at it. Manual override trumps any strength your ancient ass may have. You lose. Seafood menu reject. For a second, the other three all stared at me, and I slowly began chuckling. A second later, I joined in, and we all slid down the door into sitting positions against it, laughing softly to each other. A soft voice choked away our laughter and echoed through the corridor. "You think you've won, Desmond?" We all looked up to see Brockman standing in the center of the junction, somehow awake and wearing only a patient gown. In her left hand was one of the doctor's scalpels. Blood dripped from the blade and the clenched fist that held it. I could only assume it belonged to the medical team. I pressed myself back against the metal. "You think just because you kept one of them out, you're safe?" She let out a loud, insane laugh. Her eyes wide and darted around. "You haven't done shit. All you've done is delayed the inevitable. You can't win against these things. They're as old as the earth itself. They'll find a way inside sooner or later, and then what Carpenter told me would happen will. And you will scream. You will all scream." The eyes locked onto mine. And in that instant, I realized that everything she had said earlier had been true. It had wanted her to know, to tell all of us, to tell me. But you, Desmond, you'll scream last and loudest, and it will be torture and agony which you could never possibly imagine. She raised the arm that held the scalpel. "Good does not triumph over evil where evil lives, and God will not save you down here." Laughing maniacally, she raised the scalpel to her neck and in one fluid motion, slit her throat from ear to ear. Figueroa's screams beside me stung my eardrums as her body fell to the ground, her mouth gurgling as she died, but it was not loud enough to mask the sound of the buzzer signaling that the west airlock had finished draining, and the hatch unlocking. That moment was over 2 hours ago. It seems like more of an eternity to me. The four of us ran, and I saw the others stumbling out of the operations room in a daze. The spell on them now lifted. I knew it was only because they wanted them all to see what was coming through the hatch, wanted them to feel the same horror that Notting and Carpenter and the others must have felt in their last moments of their lives, because they savor every drop of it. They wanted them conscious to witness their own deaths. I never looked back. I didn't want to see it tear into the first of the people I'd come to call my friends, see them torn apart slowly, hear their screams, though. A single one, then silence for a time. Then another. All in almost the same way as we'd heard Notting scream through the speakers. King and Alden had become separated from Figueroa and me. I don't know where they'd gone, but we heard the screams about an hour later, one after the other. The two of us, the last two remaining, had locked ourselves in the research lab, cowering under the table with a computer that had finished decoding the warning that I already knew by now in my heart and soul. Stay away from here. Evil is imprisoned below. Death is what you shall find if you stay. Figueroa ran away half an hour ago. She put her hands over her ears, no doubt being mentally tortured by the monsters. Not the small one, but the one that peers out of its newly unlocked prison, its horrible face filled with malice, with glee at what it's about to do once again. It must have become too much for her, because she finally wrenched herself free from my arms, ran to the closed hatch, and was gone. I know I should have been the brave one and gone after her, but I was too afraid. I dashed across the room and resealed the door before attempting to barricade it with another table in the lab, though I know that when those monsters chose to come for me, that I won't stop them or slow their pursuit. I heard her scream 5 minutes ago. I know I'm all that remains of the entire team, and that's why I'm hastily scrawling this account on a few sheets of scrap paper, ones that I found on top of the desk I hide under. Because somebody needs to know the truth about what happened down there. I hear them pressing against the walls of the lab now. I hear their soft, hissing cries of glee as they slowly inch closer to the hatch. But over all of that, I can hear their goddamn master whispering to me in my head, whispering to me in the voice of the person I loved and cared for most in this world. It delights telling me in that voice all the things it plans to do to me. Things I can't bear to write down. For I'll lose the last tendrils of sanity left in my body. Brockman was right. It did leave me until last. It let me hear the ends of all the others. Let each kill, shatter a part of my soul, and now that it's almost completely broken me, it's sending its underlings to me. They'll break into my temporary refuge, they'll hunt me, they'll hurt me, they'll bite and splash me until I'm half dead. They won't kill me. No. That honor's reserved for the master, the monster that's the source of old sailors' tales, of legends as far back as man has dwelled on this planet. They'll drag my almost lifeless body out of the airlock, force me into my suit, keep me from drowning, and then bring me back to those godforsaken ruins. To that hole, to that broken lock. And down where it awaits me to make my death something that even the cosmos will take notice of. I'm placing this account into the inner compartment of the emergency distress beacon, hooked into the wall on the opposite side of the lab, and then sending it up to the surface. Please, I beg of you one final time, do not come down here looking for us. Stay away from this stretch of ocean at any costs. We've unleashed something that the creatures who locked it away tried to keep hidden from us for our own sake, humanity's sake. This is a place that we were never meant to go. Nothing but death awaits you down here in the void. Stay away. Go to bed and wait for the Sandman. Even as it came out of James's mouth, it seemed to him a strange thing to say, and he wasn't sure why he had, but for some reason it worked. Daniel went to bed. The next morning, though, he asked, "What does the Sandman look like?" James was making breakfast. Daniel sat at the table, short legs swinging under his chair. Nothing really, James said. It's just an expression. What does that mean? Just something people say. He put a plate of eggs in front of Daniel and kissed him on the top of his head. He thought that would be the end of it. Until he saw the Sandman for himself. He was getting ready for bed and stopped by Daniel's room to check on him while he slept, as he often did. It was such a routine precaution that when he saw a pale, naked man sitting on the edge of Daniel's bed, rocking back and forth, it took a moment for him to process what he was seeing. He reacted the way any father would, of course. He ran into the room screaming, and for a moment, he thought about attacking the intruder. But then the man on the bed turned, and that's when James saw that it wasn't really a man. It was a pale, slithery thing, hairless and warped. Its joints turned the wrong way, its body out of shape with itself. When it moved, it was like an insane marionette dancing on a stage. James froze. The skittering thing watched him. He felt spreading warmth, and he realized he'd pissed his pants. Only when he remembered that Daniel was still in the bed, staring at the broken-shaped thing sitting a foot away, did he regain the courage to move. He grabbed Daniel and ran. In the hall, he turned to see if the thing would follow him, but it didn't. For a moment it watched, and then, moving like a stop-motion nightmare, it crawled to the window and jumped out, leaving only the billowing curtains to mark its passing. James had trouble talking to the police. He reported a break-in, but when asked to describe the intruder, he didn't know what to say. How could he make the ordinary man in the blue uniform, sitting at his kitchen table while two of his colleagues searched the house, understand a thing like he'd seen? He couldn't even understand it himself. To make it worse, Daniel's memory did not correspond to James's. He described an ordinary-looking burglar, a man in a mask, he said. James thought about it. Had it been a mask? No, it would had to have been a full costume, an elaborate one, something like they would use for a movie, and that wouldn't explain the way it moved. But in the end, he simply echoed his son's testimony. A man in a mask, he said. A burglar. The lie unsettled him almost as much as what had happened. The doctors said Daniel wasn't hurt. It showed no signs of molestation. James was relieved. They stayed at a motel for a couple of nights until they felt ready to come home, and then James had a new security system installed, along with bars on the windows. He didn't like the sight of them in Daniel's room, but it seemed like the only thing to do. James was frightened that first night back in the house, but Daniel, strangely, was not. When asked if he felt okay sleeping alone, he just said yes. In the end, it was James who found himself wishing that he were not sleeping alone. He was up all night listening for the sound of anything moving in the house, although he had convinced himself that his memory was faulty and that it had been a normal, albeit probably deeply disturbed, man in his son's room. When he closed his eyes, even for a moment, he pictured bloodless skin, a twisted, inhuman face. He found himself wondering, why my house? Why my family? He knew, of course, that there didn't have to be a reason, but still, he wondered. 2 weeks later, Daniel stopped talking. James didn't notice at first. Kids went through quiet phases sometimes, but eventually he tried to get Daniel to talk, and he wouldn't. Eventually, it became clear that he couldn't. Back to the doctor they went. Nothing wrong with him that we can see, was the diagnosis. Was it the trauma? James asked. Could be, they said. Sometimes these things come on late. Children can be a mystery, even to those who know them best. They recommended a child psychiatrist whom James couldn't afford. He could not, for that matter, even afford the bill they were giving him now. Nothing seemed to help. Daniel would write out answers to questions sometimes, but never more than a yes or no. When James would ask him what was wrong, or if he'd seen or heard anything that frightened him, Daniel would only stare. He seemed furtive and bemused. James found himself missing the sound of his son's voice. Sometimes he wanted to hear it so bad that he ached, but it seemed that Daniel would not talk again until he was ready. James had other things to worry about, too. He was convinced, beyond reason, that the intruder was not really gone. Though the alarm never went off, and the locks and bars remained undisturbed, he was sure that he heard movement in the night. Not normal movement. It was a sound like a huge snake slithering through the house. When he heard it, he imagined horrible things. Nothing was ever there when he went to investigate, though he often thought he glimpsed something just out the corner of his eye. A pale foot, or a misshapen shadow that would slink away as soon as he turned. He rarely slept. And when he did, he had haunted dreams. Soon he realized he had not left the house in weeks except to go to the bank and to buy groceries. He felt hemmed in. With Daniel acting mute, he hadn't had an actual conversation with anyone in weeks. So he called his mother. The connection was bad, and her voice sounded faint, on the verge of being not there at all. "I guess I'm okay, Ma," he said, pausing to wipe the sweat from his palms, and then make sure that he could hear Daniel playing in the next room. "But things have been a little rough. We had a break-in." "Oh, how awful," Mom said. "Did they take anything?" "Nah, just ran off. It was weird, though. I haven't really felt comfortable since then." "Are you still working at the hospital?" "No, Ma. I left last year. You know that." "Oh, well. Have you been getting out? What about that nice woman you were seeing last year, the one who played the piano?" James scowled. She was always asking that kind of thing. Didn't she know how hard it was being a single father, that he didn't have the time? He was about to say so, and something made him pause. "Ma, is anyone else on the line?" "I don't think so." James was sure he heard it, though. The short, gasping sound of someone trying to hold their breath and failing. A cold feeling crept across the back of his neck. "You're sure nobody's listening on your other phone?" "Dear, there is no other phone. I'm on the cell. That's why the service is so bad." "Then what is—" James stopped. If the sound wasn't coming from her end, then... He dropped the phone and raced to the hall. The extension hung on its hook, undisturbed. Heart pounding, he hurtled into the garage. The spare phone sat on the workbench. No one was in sight. Could someone have been here all along, listening to his phone call, and then slithered away? Might they be here even now? The next day, he took out the extra phone extensions. He even filled in the jacks with rubber cement. Daniel watched him work, eyes curious, but James offered no explanation. He began giving Daniel a light physical exam every week. His CNA training was a little rusty after a year in disability, but you never really forget. It was an absurd thing to do, of course. Even if there was a physical cause for Daniel's behavior, it'd be nothing he could discover this way. And he was aware, on some level, that it was compulsive behavior. Nevertheless, it made him feel better. One morning, James set the diaphragm of the stethoscope against Daniel's chest. But he could not locate a heartbeat. He moved his hand in search of the right spot, to no avail. Then to test it, he listened to his own heartbeat. Came through, steady and clear. But when he checked Daniel again, he didn't hear anything. A thought came unbidden to him of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, whose chest was empty as a kettle. A sick feeling roiled in his stomach. He threw the stethoscope down and grabbed Daniel by the shoulders, looking into his face. Daniel stared back with bright eyes. He even smiled a little with the corners of his mouth. James felt the tingle of tears. He swept his son up in his arms and hugged him, and Daniel hugged back. Then James put his shirt back on him and sent him to play. The stethoscope, he decided, was broken. He threw it in the trash. Things got worse. James's terrors were no longer relegated to the long hours of the night. Now it seemed that some creeping, some skittering and scuttling, some unknowable noise in some dark corner or another, filled every second of his day. The thought of how big the house really was started to weigh on him. There were so many rooms he wasn't in at any given time, so many places someone or something else could be. He imagined strange figures occupying the rest of his home when he wasn't around, melting into the walls or merging with the shadows whenever he turned on a light or opened a door. How would he know if they were there? How would he ever know? Soon he didn't even have to be outside of a room to imagine it. When he walked up the stairs, he pictured pale figures lurking beneath them. When he went down the hall, he pictured a crawling thing slithering behind the walls, shadowing his every step. If he sat too long in the same chair, he imagined that it was right behind him, and he was never comfortable when he turned around and found nothing there. As he could only guess, that meant that it had moved, swiftly and silently, behind him once again. Wherever he was not looking right now, that was where he imagined it to be. He was losing his mind, he knew. The only thing that helped him cling to sanity was that Daniel seemed undisturbed. Other than his muteness, his behavior was perfectly normal. And whenever he seemed to sense that his father was troubled, he would hug him or squeeze his hand or even smile. Sometimes when he left the room, James cried. One night he found himself creeping around the house with no lights on at 2 o'clock in the morning. If the intruding thing had taken to violating his daytime activities, then he would get revenge by confronting it on its own terms. The night. And really, night was no more frightening to him now than day. They were almost interchangeable. He padded barefoot down the halls, up the stairs, in and out of disused rooms. Sometimes he stopped to listen, hoping to locate it by sound. It was a stealthy, creeping thing, he knew, but it was awkward at times, and he couldn't always keep its strangely shaped limbs from making their distinct, irregular footsteps. The smallest noise would give it away. There was one room he suspected it spent most of its time in. The spare room. Not a bedroom at all, really, more like a closet, just large enough to accommodate a bed if one was so inclined. It was unpainted and uncarpeted, drafty. He'd always meant to fix it up. He didn't come in here very often because he disliked the bare, unused look of it. It made him think of a partially dissected corpse. He came in now, though. If the thing made its nest any one place in the house, this would be it. Of course, there was nothing there now. But that didn't mean there was nothing there. He cursed, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. What was he missing? How did it hide from him? What was its secret? He peered into the room's empty corners one by one, getting his face a few inches from the plaster and floorboards so that he could be certain that there was no space for it to conceal itself. The light bulb flickered. He froze. My God, he thought, it's on the ceiling. He pictured it crawling above him like a huge pale lizard. That's how it gets around, he thought. That's how it escapes any time I should have cornered it. Just scuttles up the wall and hides right over my head. He imagined it dangling down behind him like a spider. If I turn around, he thought, it'll be there, hanging with its face right next to mine. He held his breath. He did not want to turn around, but he had no choice. It was between him and the door. With a quiet sob, he rounded on his heels. Of course, he was alone. There was no man on the ceiling. He checked twice. Maybe it crawled out and was waiting for him in the hall. But when he checked there, the coast was once again clear. It should have been a relief. But it was not. After all, it had to be in here somewhere. If the ceiling wasn't its trick, that just meant it was something else, something even more strange, even more clever. He went to Daniel's room. He hadn't stopped checking on him at night like he always had. This time, though, rather than open the door, he listened at first, pressing his ear against the grain of the cheap wood and holding his breath, terrified that he would hear a skittering sound on the other side of the barrier. What he heard instead shocked him more. Daniel was talking to someone. James recoiled for a second, and then, when he caught his breath, he all but kicked the door in. Daniel was already awake, indeed, sitting up in bed, but he wasn't saying anything now. The light flashed on, and James stalked halfway into the room before stopping, suddenly torn. What did he want more? To confirm that his son could speak again, or to find whomever he was speaking to? The creak of a door hinge settled the matter for him. He ran to the closet and threw it open. There was nothing inside. Or at least, nothing that shouldn't be there. He swept aside clothes on their hangers, but nothing was hiding behind them. Then he dragged the toy box out and emptied it under the floor. Nothing. He combed along the bare walls and floor and, yes, the ceiling, pushing aside every last bit of rubbish and stray knickknacks so that he could be sure, absolutely sure, that nothing was hiding. All the while, Daniel watched him. After a few minutes, James was panting and covered in sweat, and the closet was bare, and there was neither intruder nor answer inside. It struck him as funny, somehow, and he started to laugh very quietly. He kicked his son's toys out of the way as he went to sit down on the bed, dazed. He became aware all at once of several things, first being that he had not slept in days. It was nowhere near his right mind. The second was how close he'd come to really losing it. For good. Tomorrow, he decided they would both sleep until the afternoon. And when they did wake up, he and Daniel would get out of this creaky old house. No more staying cooped up like prisoners, no more checkups, and no more dreams about monsters. He'd even take the bars off the windows. It was time to get back to living like real people again. James saw it when he brushed a hand through Daniel's hair. He pulled Daniel a little too roughly closer. His son acquiesced to the examination without fidgeting or complaint, as James pawed the side of his head, hoping that what he was seeing would somehow stop being apparent. He stared and stared until he ached from not blinking, but there was no denying what was right in front of his eyes. Daniel was missing an ear. No, he realized with mounting nausea, both ears. There was no injury, no incision, no mark where they should have been, simply smooth, blank flesh. As blank as Daniel's quiet, unperturbed demeanor. James swept him up in his arms and ran into the hall. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he meant to do when he got there. He just knew that there was now nothing more important than getting his son out of that house, where their path was cut off. A naked man sat in the hallway with his back to them. No, not a man. James recognized its stretched limbs and stooped shoulders. The pale thing squatted on its haunches, rocking back and forth like it was palsied. It almost seemed to be in pain. James hugged his son closer and backed away, then he heard Daniel's voice. "Daddy?" James turned to Daniel and he heard the voice again. "Daddy?" But Daniel's lips hadn't moved. James looked back at the hunched figure. Its head jerked when it talked like a tick. "Hello, Daddy?" James's mouth went dry. It took several tries before he could speak. Don't call me that. It is this voice's name for you. Go away. Leave my family alone. But I am your family. The longer it talked, the more the voice became distorted and blurred. An icy feeling nestled in James's stomach. Who are you? Someone who came to visit. Why here? You invited me. James's heart thudded against the inside of his chest. Why? I had something you wanted. James licked his dry lips. You're lying. You don't have anything I want. I want you to leave. Leave and never come back. Who is Daniel's mother? James blinked. What? Who is Daniel's mother? The hell kind of question is that? How old is Daniel? James blinked again, the thing's voice causing a pinching pain in the center of his forehead. Stop asking me these things. When is Daniel's birthday? I don't know. What is his middle name? Shut up! What was his first word? I said, shut up! James wanted to tear this thing apart with his bare hands. Only the heaviness of Daniel in his arms kept him where he was. You were alone. You wanted a son, so I made one for you. James's hands began to shake. That doesn't make sense. Made out of what? Out of myself. James's stomach turned over. But now I need those parts back. Daniel picked at James's shoulder to get his attention. Something was strange about Daniel's face. Danny, open your eyes. Daniel scrunched his eyes shut tighter. Open your eyes. Danny, open your eyes. Daniel shook his head, trying to refuse, but he couldn't hold it forever. Eventually, his eyelids flicked up and James saw the truth. Daniel's eyes were gone. James almost dropped him. For a second, he wanted to throw his son down so that he could stop looking into those empty holes in his face. Daniel opened his mouth as if to speak, but of course, he had no voice. He is coming back to be a part of me. Again. No, give him back. Give him back. I cannot. It's been too long. I warned you this would happen. You're lying. You're lying. You're a fucking liar. Give me my son back. Give him back. I do not lie. I warned you. He could not exist forever. But you do not remember. You can only remember what I want you to. You forget all the times we have talked. Daniel felt like a doll, or an empty bag. His hair was falling out, disappearing before it touched the ground. His hands vanished into his sleeves, his feet rolled up inside of his pant cuffs. James cradled the tiny, shapeless thing. Tears streamed down his face. Soon he held a pile of empty clothes. And then those two were gone. He looked around the house. Toys disappeared, photos vanished from their frames. Daniel's little shoes were no longer by the door. James turned towards Daniel's room and confronted a wall where the door should have been. He groped the blank surface, fingertips scrambling. He hit his head against the wall. The pain didn't feel real. Why did you do this? It was what you wanted, and I learned so much. This is impossible. People will ask, people will wonder, the police, the hospitals, the people in neighborhoods. They have already forgotten him. They only remembered what I wanted them to, like you. James pressed his hands to his aching skull. Will I at least remember him after this? You can try, but your mind will fail you. Now that everything he was is part of me again. James sat on the floor, looking at the blank wall. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the thing creep towards him and even felt its wet hand on his shoulder. But he didn't look at it. If I remember any of this, he said, then why tell me? Because a father should know. And then James was alone. Abigail worried about James sometimes. When they met a year ago, he said that he'd never married, he'd never had kids. But there was a certain pained expression he assumed when he said that last part. Abigail knew that look. She'd met parents who'd lost children before. He'd learned to recognize it. And there were other things about him that worried her too. Sometimes she would find him staring at a particular spot on the wall, brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't seem to realize he was doing it. And of course, there was the insomnia and the sleepwalking to consider. Yes, there was lots to worry about, but she loved him all the same. James still said he'd never had kids. And neither had she. She'd long wanted one, but it was impossible. She worried that James wouldn't stay with a woman who couldn't be a mother, though he constantly assured her that was not so. There were times, and more often of late, they were the nights when James took to sleepwalking. And even Abigail imagined that she heard strange scuttling sounds in the house and saw impossible shapes in dark corners. When she thought she would do anything, absolutely anything, if it meant having a little daughter for she and James to raise. And at those moments, she became truly afraid. But she never knew why. I need advice, and I need it fast, but first, let me explain what happened today. My name's Noah. I just survived something I can't explain. I'm sitting in my truck right now, heater blasting, hands still shaking as I type this out of my phone. I should be calling someone. I mean, the police maybe? But who's gonna believe what I'm about to tell you? It started as a simple weekend trip to decompress after a brutal week at work. I've been ice fishing since I was a kid, and there's something meditative about sitting in a tent on a frozen lake, waiting for a bite. No phone service, no emails, just you and the ice. I drove out to Drifting Lake around 7 a.m. It's a pain in the ass to even find. I only knew about it because my friend's dad told me about it a while ago, and even then, I had to search for it on satellite maps. Access point requires a solid 30-minute drive down a maintenance road that's barely maintained at all. Today, it was worse than usual, patches of ice making the whole drive feel like playing Russian roulette with my truck's alignment. I saw the tire tracks from other vehicles, so at least I knew I wasn't completely crazy for attempting it. But every time my wheels slipped, I questioned my life choices. But that's exactly why I like Drifting Lake. A terrible access keeps most people away. Except today. There were more people than I expected. I I counted maybe 15 other fishermen spread across the lake, their pop-up tents dotting the ice like colorful mushrooms. A couple of guys near the shore were unloading their gear from a sled, and one of them gave me a friendly wave as I passed. "Any better luck out here before?" I called over. "First time adrift in lake," he shouted back. "But he said it's worth the drive, though." "Usually is," I replied, giving him a thumbs up. Further out, I passed an older guy who was already set up, sitting on his bucket outside his tent, with a thermos of coffee. He nodded at me as I walked by. "Hell of a drive to get here," I said. "Always is," he agreed with a chuckle. "Be sitting in traffic on the regular lakes." I found a spot about 70 yards from the nearest tent, started setting up. That's when things started going wrong. First, I stepped into a fishing hole that hadn't completely frozen over. The shock of icy water soaking through my boot nearly made me slip, and I spent 5 minutes trying to wring out my sock in the freezing wind. Then the wind itself became a problem. I've set up this tent 100 times, but today the gusts were relentless, whipping the fabric around and nearly yanking the poles from my hands. At one point I lost my grip and the tent pole swung back, the metal end missing my temple by maybe an inch. Felt like whooshing past my face and actually heard it whistle. If it had connected, I'd probably be unconscious in the ice right now. And finally, after 20 minutes of fighting with the damn thing, I got the tent secured. I was sweating, despite the cold, frustrated, and already wondering if this trip was a mistake. But I was here now. Might as well fish. I drilled my main hole, watching the auger chew through 8 inches of solid ice. Then I drilled a second hole about 3 feet away for my underwater camera. It's a nice setup, right? One that I'd invested in last season. Lets me see what's happening below the ice, check if fish are actually down there or if I'm just wasting my time. I dropped the camera down and watched the monitor as it descended. Murky greenish water, some vegetation, and the occasional flash of something small darting past. It's normal lake stuff. I didn't see any decent-sized fish, but I'd give it time. The first hour passed quietly. Too quietly, actually. I kept expecting to hear the usual sounds of other fishermen, people calling to their buddies, the whine of augers drilling new holes, maybe some laughter, complaints about the cold. But I heard nothing except wind and the occasional creak of ice settling beneath me. Around 9:30 a.m., I heard the first splash. It came from somewhere to my left, maybe 50 or 60 meters away. I figured someone had caught something and was hauling it up to their hold. A few minutes later, another splash from a different direction. Then another. I checked my own line. Nothing. Not even a nibble. Camera showed the same empty water. Another splash closer this time. Then what sounded like someone shouting, but the wind made it hard to tell. Could have been excitement over a catch or someone calling to a friend. Ice fishing lakes can be weird with sound. Sometimes voices carry perfectly, sometimes they get swallowed by the wind. I went back to watching my line, adjusting my jig, trying to stay patient. The splashing continued intermittently, always from different directions. I started to find it annoying. If everyone else was catching fish, why wasn't I getting any action? Then I heard this scream. It was unmistakable this time, a genuine terror-filled scream that cut through the wind, close, very close, maybe from the tent nearest to mine. I scrambled out of my shelter, nearly tripping over my bucket in my haste. The screaming had stopped as abruptly as it started, but I ran towards where I heard it, my boots slipping on the ice. The tent was maybe 70 meters away, bright orange fabric flapping in the wind. As it got closer, I could see the entrance was unzipped and hanging open. "Hey!" I shouted. Are you okay in there?" No response. I reached the tent and looked inside. Empty. The guy's gear was scattered around. His rod was lying on the ice, his bucket tipped over, but what made my stomach turn was the fishing hole. I mean, it was huge, not the standard 8-inch diameter you drill with an auger, but easily 3 feet across, The edges looked chewed or broken inward, chunks of ice scattered around it, leading to that hole were drag marks. 2 parallel lines scraped across the ice like someone had been pulled. I stared at that hole, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing, and then I heard it. A wet, sucking sound, like something large moving through water just below the surface. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked onto that too large hole. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze, colder than the air around me. All the other tents were collapsed, every single one of them. 15 brightly colored shelters that had been standing when I'd set up were now just deflated piles of fabric on the ice, and near each one I could make out dark circles, enlarged fishing holes, just like the one in front of me. The splashing sounds I'd been hearing all morning suddenly made horrible sense. I was alone on the ice. I ran back to my tent, my mind racing. I needed to pack up, get off this lake immediately. My hands shook as I started throwing gear into my bag, forgetting organizing, forgetting about being careful. Just grab what I could and go. And that's when I glanced at the camera monitor. The screen showed murky water, but something was different. The camera was panning, being pushed by a current, and as it turned, I saw it. A person in the water, maybe 20 feet from the camera. My first thought was horror. Someone had fallen through the ice. Someone was drowning right now, and I was watching it happen on a screen. But that thought lasted maybe half a second before my brain started screaming that something was wrong. The person was just floating there, not struggling, not thrashing, not doing anything a drowning person would do, just suspended in the water, completely still except for the gentle drift of the current. And they were staring directly at the camera. The skin was pale, almost luminescent in the water, visibility bloated. Maybe think of bodies pulled from rivers in the news, but this wasn't a corpse. It was moving with purpose, with intelligence, even though it hadn't been struggling a moment before. The face was human, eyes, nose, mouth, all in the right place, but the eyes were too wide, unblinking. They caught what little light filtered down in a way that made them reflect like an animal's. The skin had a strange sheen to it, almost waxy, and that's when I noticed the neck. There were slits along the sides, 3, 4 on each side, opening and closing rhythmically, like gills, like it was breathing underwater. My brain tried to rationalize it. Weird lighting, murky water, shadows playing tricks, but then the person started swimming toward the camera, and any hope of rational explanation died. No human moves like that underwater. It didn't kick its legs or pull with its arms the way a swimmer would. It glided, moving with a fluid grace that was completely wrong. Its arms extended in front of it as it got closer, and I could see the hands clearly. The fingers, they were too long. There was webbing stretched between them, translucent webbing like a frog's feet connecting each digit. "Oh God," I whispered, and that broke my paralysis. I grabbed my phone, wallet, keys, shoved them into my pockets. Everything else, the expensive rod, the tackle box, the heater, I left it all. The monitor showed the thing getting closer, its pale face growing larger on the screen. I was halfway out of the tent when I heard the ice crack behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I heard the sound of ice breaking, of something forcing its way through a space too small for it, widening the hole with terrible strength. I heard water sloshing onto the ice, heard something that might have been breathing but sounded too wet, too wrong, and I ran. I ran. The ice was slippery, and I nearly fell twice, but horror kept me upright and moving. I could hear the wind and my own ragged breathing and my boots slipping on the ice, but I didn't hear anything behind me that somehow made it worse. I made it to shore, to my truck. I fumbled with the keys before finally getting the door open. I threw myself inside. I locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. Only then did I look back at the lake. My tent was collapsed just like the others. My fishing hole, I could see even from this distance it was larger than it should be. Much, much larger. Camera setup was gone, the mount, the cable, everything just gone like it had never been there. I sat in my truck for maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer, just staring at that lake, at the collapsed tents, at the enlarged holes in the ice, at the evidence of something I couldn't explain. And then I drove home, following that same rough maintenance road, my wet sock squelching in my boot with every press of the gas pedal. And now I'm home and I don't know what to do. There's people gone, 15 fishermen who were on that lake this morning. I talked to some of them, the guy with the coffee thermos, the two buddies unloading their sled. They seemed like good people, just out for a day of fishing, like me. They had vehicles. I mean, I passed them at the access point on my way out. Someone's going to be looking for them. Families, friends, co-workers. People are going to notice they're missing. What do I tell the police? That something in the lake dragged them all under? That I saw a pale, bloated thing swimming towards my camera with webbed hands, gill slits in the neck. That it was intelligent enough to take my camera to eliminate evidence. They'll think I'm insane. Or worse, they'll think I did something to those people. I have no proof, no camera footage, no witnesses, nothing. Just my story about a creature in drifting lake that hunts ice fishermen. I keep checking the local news, but there's nothing yet about missing persons. Maybe no one's noticed yet. Maybe their families think they're still out fishing, that they'll be home for dinner. But they won't. I know what I saw. I know what's in that lake, but knowing and proving are two different things. And honestly, part of me wants to go back, not to drifting lake. I mean, never there again, but to other lakes, to other ice fishing spots. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years. It's one of the only things that's helped me decompress, that gives me peace. But how can I? How can I sit on the ice now, knowing what might be underneath? Every fishing hole I drill from now on, I'll be wondering if something's down there, watching me. Every sound on the ice will make me jump. Every splash in the distance send me into a panic. Maybe that's the worst part of all this. That thing didn't just take those people, it took something from me too. The one hobby that made me feel grounded, gave me an escape from the stress of everyday life. So I'm asking you, what should I do? I mean, should I report this? Should I go to the police? Tell them what happened, even though they won't believe me? Or should I stay silent and hope that someone with more credibility, finds evidence of what's out there? I mean, those people are dead, or worse. And I got away, but I can't shake the feeling that it let me go, that it knew it had taken my camera, eliminated my proof, decided one witness with an insane story was better than no survivors at all. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Anyone heard stories about drifting lake? I need to know that I'm not crazy. I need to know what to do, because right now, all I can think about is that pale face staring at the camera, those gill slits opening and closing, and those two long fingers with webs stretched between them, and the sound of ice breaking as it forced its way through to get to me. I don't know if I can ever go ice fishing again, but God, I don't want to give it up. I used to go diving a lot. Not so much anymore, but a couple of years ago, I was really into it. I had my license and everything. It was really beautiful down there. Pale patterned sand, the water washing away the distance like a blue mist. Flashes of the brightest colors you've ever seen. Some of these fish would just dart into view. But my favorite thing to do is to just hover right where the shelf plunges into the deep. You get the greatest dynamics there as deep sea creatures come up to feed. Anyway, one time I was drifting along near Antigua, about 40 feet down. I had 2 tanks with me so I could stay down for several hours. The shelf sloped off to my left, and rocks and coral broke the monotony of the sand to my right. I hadn't seen much that day, and I was getting a bit bored, but then I noticed a large octopus. It was like a deep sea type, probably washed up accidentally. They don't usually come up to hunt. And it seemed sluggish. It didn't react much when I drifted over to it. Now, octopi aren't very friendly creatures. If you could manage to get near one, they usually flee within seconds. I'm sure that you've seen videos of them. They change colors to match their environment. Not all species do that, but they're all very good at hiding. So seeing a deep sea octopus up close, it was quite an opportunity. It was about a foot from crown to beak, and dark mottled green. These tentacles curled around it, perhaps 4 feet long, when extended, and pale on the underside. Its eyes looked like golden rings around narrow black pupils. It was having trouble moving and looked half dead. I decided to try to get near it. There were some yellow-tailed jacks nearby, and I speared one with my knife. Sorry if that offends you. I'm not one of those touch-nothing divers, But cautiously, I approached the octopus and offered it my fish, shoving it out ahead of me, letting it drift towards the creature. Success. It didn't run, but lazily reached an arm out to capture the morsel. Brought it under to its beak, and it began to devour it, and I drifted closer and tried to acclimate it to my presence. Over maybe half an hour or so, it became more lively and used to my presence, and apparently I had bought its tolerance with my offering, and it even began to play a little bit, darting away from me and then back. I had a stick with me that I used to test holes in mud and such, and it occurred to me that maybe I could teach it to play fetch. I brought the stick out, waved it, till it seemed like I had its attention, and then I threw the stick out sideways. It didn't go very far, underwater of course, but the octopus went after it, grabbed it with its tentacles. It didn't seem inclined to return it to me, though, so I swam over, was waving the stick at me, and then tossed it out into the side. It's copying me. I retrieved the stick, and then an interesting idea came into my head. Next to us was a large, flat rock, covered in half an inch of mud and detritus. Careful not to disturb the layers, I took the stick and slowly drew a crude figure of a man. 2 legs, 2 arms, and a round head coming off a central cylinder. The octopus seemed to be watching with interest. I tossed it the stick, and it caught it easily. It sat there toying with it, and for a few moments I thought my expectations had been too high, but then it reached out with a stick and began tracing its own mark on the mud. It was even cruder than mine, to be sure, but very clearly a drawing. However, the proportions were all wrong. It had fused the head and the body into one ball, and there were too many legs. I was just happy it was copying me. I'd heard octopi were smart, but this was really something. But then it hit me like a freezing wave. The octopus wasn't drawing my drawing, it was drawing itself. The implications for this were huge. If I had a video camera, I would have been a famous man. The only other animal I'm aware of that's capable of the imagination and self-awareness to do something like this was like the ape, first cousin to humans. That the ancient octopus, without so much as a spinal column, had the mental capacity for such a feat would surely have turned biology on its head. However, I didn't have a camera, and the scientists I've told my story to greeted it with understandable skepticism. I put all my time into trying to prove it myself, but I just can't bring myself to go diving anymore. Anyway, once that realization struck, I got excited. The octopus passed the stick back, and I began drawing the other sea creatures and common sights. We kept on for maybe an hour. The octopus contributed as much as I. He even drew something I took to be a crude figure of a submarine. A con tower, propeller screw, and even torpedo holes. Finally, the octopus led me to the other side of the rock, blank canvas. Far down in the corner, it again drew itself, and then me. These figures were very small, maybe an inch or two tall. Then, painstakingly, it went to work on a much larger drawing. At first I thought it was a whale, but whales are roughly the size of a submarine, so it didn't seem to justify the scale. Furthermore, the proportions were all wrong. This seemed like something humped and compact, almost as if it was upright rather than aquiline. It had weird bits sticking out. It didn't seem like fins. Couldn't place it. An oil platform, maybe? The lines were too natural. An octopus wouldn't know what the top of a platform looks like. When the drawing was done, we both sat and looked at it for a while. I took the stick back from the octopus, and circled the drawing of us, and then drew a line to the thing. I'm not sure if the octopus picked up on my confusion, because it just sort of sat there for a while. I didn't try to take the stick back. Then it started swimming away. I followed it at a distance. It seemed to be keeping a pace, leading me on. Then it turned and it shot out into the deep area of the shelf. I was a good way through my second tank and wasn't supposed to go any deeper, so I had to let it go. It stopped once to watch me, and then darted off, dissolving into the dark blue depths. I looked after it for a minute to see if it would return, but it was nothing, so I started watching the other fish and making my way back to the boat. And then suddenly, there was a low, thrumming sound all around me. It wasn't very loud, but it was big, as if it came from the ocean floor itself. I've heard of underwater eruptions, but I've never been in one, and I wondered if I was about to be. But this didn't sound like anything natural. It sounded like the call of some animal, slowed down into the virtually subsonic range and projected from huge speakers very far away. I've had a chance to look over the seismograph recordings of that day, and nothing showed up at that time for that frequency. I have no idea why. The fish were going crazy, darting back and forth and all heading inland. And not just the reef fish. Larger ones from deeper in were streaming by me and faster. Suddenly among them, the octopus appeared again. That, or one quite like it. It swam up to me and eyed me strangely, then darted past with the rest. The thrumming sounded again. Looking out to sea, I gradually became aware of a large, dark patch. It was very hard to tell how big or far away it was, but there was plenty of both to go around. It was hard to tell more than just a shadow in the murky water, but it clearly wasn't a whale or anything man-made. I couldn't even tell if it was a single creature. There seemed to be long strands like kelp or jellyfish tentacles streaming off of it, but immeasurably larger. It looked like nothing so much as an ancient, misshapen section of coral reef broke off and floating, at least the part I could see. It seemed to fade off into the distance as though that mass, immense as it may be, was only a limb to some far larger entity. I've never seen a naval carrier from underwater, but I imagine that's the kind of shadow it would cast. Thrumming rang out a third time, and unreasonable fear seized me. I didn't appear to be in danger, though the thing was vaster than anything I'd ever seen. It was too far away to reach me quickly, and it seemed like it wouldn't fit into the shallows anyway. Nevertheless, I was gripped by the feeling that if I didn't get away as fast as I could, I'd be dragged down into the abyss and consumed. I could feel the very water itself drawing down into the black maw. Heedless of the depths of my equipment, I surged upwards. As I rose, of course, I began cramping, but I clawed my way up anyway. I was still far from the boat. When I broke the surface, I could barely move. I had to keep my mouthpiece in because I couldn't keep my mouth above water. I certainly couldn't call or signal the boat. Far from receding, my panic was worse than ever from above the water. I couldn't see the thing or tell whether it was coming for me. I thrashed my slow, painful way towards the boat, and finally, someone on board noticed me, and they came to pick me up. I had the bends bad. I had to stay in a hospital for a few weeks until it was over. The doctors told me I was lucky not to get a stroke or some other permanent damage. So that's my story. Sorry, I can't give a more satisfying conclusion. I still don't know myself what I experienced. My friends think that it was some form of rapture, but it just doesn't match the symptoms. Narcosis is supposed to reduce anxiety, not stimulate it. And my hallucinations, if that's what they were too vivid and specific. Anyway, since then I've always been afraid of the water. I tried going out once or twice, but all I can do is stay shaking in the boat. I think there really was something out there. And I don't think it's something I ever want to come across again. A lesson my dad imposed upon me at every opportunity was, if you want something, you have to be willing to earn it. Cookie jars on tall counters were a favorite lesson of his when I was younger, and more recently, he bought an older car and told me if I could fix it, it was mine. Grease-packed nails and bruised knuckles weren't exactly the sort of fantasies I'd had about high school when I was playing princess, but the hours spent cursing and bolts and looking over manuals with him, those are treasures that I hold dearly. Find a way to get what you need so you can have what you want. That was how he was, always insistent on my independence. I suppose he was scared that I'd run into a younger version of himself out there in the world, and, like my mother, be too timid to reject his advances. Dad tried hard to make it right once Mom escaped what he had thought to call a family. He'd never meant to make her do something she didn't want. He thought she was happy. Happy to be his wife, happy to be my mother, but she wasn't. And as soon as she saw the opportunity, she left. Dad's scared I'll be like her. Too scared of making a mistake to make my own choices. Too scared to tell him what I wanted. Too scared to tell him how I felt. Visions of a peasant girl doomed to the service of an arrogant king likely colored his reflection in the bathroom mirror a somber shade of blue. So I always made an effort to show him that I was happy, I was strong, and that I loved him. I wanted to change how he saw himself, to paint the mirror all the colors of the rainbow like the tinted glass of a church honoring a saint. I wanted him to be free of her, and I wanted the same for myself. Dad had us moving a lot over the years, chasing work where he could find it. Friendships outside of my family had always been transient, and I made an unconscious habit of keeping a comfortable distance from new people. Don't get too attached. The self-imposed rule that locked tears behind glassy eyes, watching everyone disappear in the rearview mirror, reduced to nicknames and seldom visited group chats. Mom used to muse that I would make a fine widow, an awful jab formed from what was surely her own fantasy. Stoicism wasn't in my vocabulary, but nonetheless, it formed an undercurrent that dragged me down into social obscurity. So when we moved to the quiet outskirts of a town in the foothills of California, I surrendered again to the malaise of pessimism and made the best of what was. Do well in class, make new friends, make sure Dad knew that everything was okay. No wants, no wishes. But something happened at that school that had never happened to me before. I met someone. A strange, bright girl whose campaign of optimism would bring me to ruin. Who followed me after school, talking about her new favorite romance novel, only to realize too late that she was on the wrong bus. Whose bag was crowded with pins, buttons, and keychains that she became a walking wind chime when she was running late to class. She was dense, and oftentimes rude, more by accident than anything else, always enthused, always smiling. She was like a gateway into every odd corner of the school, and before I had even eaten lunch on my first day, I'd been introduced to all of them. Friends had never come faster to me. Her demeanor shining over my stony expression, surely fooling people into thinking I was more personable than I actually was. The star that could make an asteroid shine. My usual walls and trappings were dissolved by her awkward, stumbling determination, and before I could rebuild the kingdom I'd made for my father, she had enshrined herself as a new ruler in my world. I was developing feelings for her that were strange to me, an uncomfortable desire for closeness that called every part of my childish conviction into question. Months passed, and in my crisis of tradition, I failed to claim anything. The days turned long, and the first day of summer brought with it terrible news. We were moving again. He never told me why. The stay had been shorter than any other. Only a few months had passed, and boxes still lay unopened around the house. Frustration at this sudden uprooting boiled over within me, and for the first time, we fought. The stupid and heedless action of a child being torn in two. His eyes were wide with shock when my petty revolution began, and sharpened with anger as it continued. At some point, I told him I hated him. I didn't mean it. I just didn't have the words for what I was experiencing, nor the patience to explain. I just wanted it to stop. I have no words for the shift in his expression. Devastation is meek, compared in the mire of anguish that seeped from him as he gripped the counter's edge. He didn't speak after that, just let me ramble on with all the sense of a screaming infant. When I finished, he just got up, walked to his room. I'd never felt so worthless in all of my life as when I heard his muffled sobs from beyond that door. I wasn't willing to apologize, nor was I willing to listen further to the undeserved distress I'd thrust upon him, so I grabbed my keys and drove. The hum of the engine we'd labored over doing nothing to clear my blurred vision. I didn't stop to pick a direction. Didn't dare offer thought beyond the reach of my headlights. The sharp turns of mountain roads soothed my unnamed aches as I swayed back and forth in time with the snaking yellow lines. Cold white scars of visibility conjuring trees as dull imitations of their daylight counterparts. It was a long time before I stopped at that turn, mindless of where I was or what I intended. Fortune never favored me, and tonight was no different, because the gravest mistake in my short life was looking at what lay beyond the roadside. The dilapidated road was partially overgrown. If any vehicle had passed between the sharp, intertwining arches of Manzanita, it would have been long ago. Shoots of life were springing from fissures in the dull concrete that connected it to the highway. Desperate saplings, tufts of grass, and persistent dandelions all poured from the rough-hewn ravines. But it was what lay just beyond the tunnel of brownish red branches It fixed a singular notion in my mind. I think I know where I am. A huge gate lay a short distance into the brush. Tall metal bars twisted in extravagant patterns around two eagle reliefs that centered each leaf. Bound shut with a thick iron chain held in place by a lock of unknown make, left unshackled. Not long ago, a particular point of intrigue was being passed around a sparsely populated corner of the local school. I encountered it in the library, its intricate largely lost to my flustered mind as that girl laid against my arm in mock slumber. The weaver of the tale, to his credit, recited it eloquently, unbothered by her display of contempt. From what I recalled, it was the story of a wishing well. As it was told, a young man had acquired a little house high in the mountains above the town. He was said to have fancied the solitude of the pines and made his nest as far from the troubles of the world as he could manage. But the young man was poor beyond comprehension, living off rabbits, struck with stones, and fish snatched from the river. Oftentimes he would be seen begging for scraps in the muddy streets come winter, or peddling pyrite to self-proclaimed prospectors in the spring. He was known to everyone in town for his time as a pauper beyond the pale, and as a result he was the first thought of who dwelt there. One of the few true friends of the man received an oddity in the mail. A letter addressed to him from his dear friend on the mountain. And it read as follows. There's an angel in my well. It offered me gold, promised me death, reached unto my heart, and stole out my breath. There's an angel in my well. The same line repeated as many times as the paper allowed, and when his friend went to check the mountain, he found a sight so strange it befuddled his senses. What had once been a dilapidated little house on the ridge had become a fabulous manor. Walls, gilded white and gold, gardens of plenty, and rooms furnished like a castle. His friends were well dressed and offered him what was described as the most frivolous collection of fine brandy anyone had ever seen. When he asked how the man had come by the incredible wealth on display, he was offered nothing but blunt dismissal. And when he went in search of the well that had once graced the property, all that he found was a wide hearth of mountain misery and a circle of stones from the river below. The man on the ridge died old, happy, and without an heir. He left all he had to the children of his friends in the town below. A story of a wish fulfilled and a life devoid of want. The prospect of seeing the place that had inspired the local legend pulled my mind from its paradoxical miasma. I grabbed my lantern from the back seat and set off into the dark, conflicting desires and convictions falling away as easily as the chain around the gate. Hinges screamed as I pushed one leaf open. Age hindered its movement, and by the glow of the lantern I saw little clouds of rust being shorn away into a fine powder, falling quickly to the ground in a reddish-orange pool of decay. I picked up the lantern and slipped between the leaves of the gate. The driveway was long and dark, winding up towards the top of the ridge, but the relief of my adventure was potent, and it carried me forward like warm wind in spring. The manzanita remained as thick walls of reaching branches, clutching at the road as I climbed higher. More than a few times I thought I heard something moving through the dry thickets, but as soon as I stopped, silence fell between the branches. Many times I wondered why I had even left the car, why I didn't return at the first sign of danger lurking in the dark. In each moment, though, the answer was clear. I wanted my wish granted, too. The way up the road felt like it was miles long, and by the time I reached the top, my calves ached and my breath was short. The final stretch of broken concrete was steep, forcing me to walk on my toes as I crested the ridge. It seemed even the road into the manor was meant to discourage unwanted or unprepared guests. And as my little lantern reflected against the shards of glass that once filled grand windows, I felt that I was both. The manor was a ruin. It was either a second floor or the roof had long collapsed into the belly of the first. Flakes of paint fluttered on the night air like moths resting against the rotting wood siding, and huge holes between faded framing gave way to the ruined interior. Tiny perforations were scattered across the remaining walls, and bright red shotgun shells were littering the ground at my feet. I felt a distinct sense of disappointment at the realization that someone else had been here recently. The dreamy qualities of the local fable were being lost one by one as they fused unceremoniously with reality. I carried on. The sureness of the ground beneath my feet offered firm assurance that as I walked around the sundered hulk of architectural gore, I would only be greeted by a mundane swath of earth. But when I slipped past the final corner of the absurdly scaled mansion, I saw it. Its shape, illuminated at the edge of my lantern's reach. There, behind the house, was an old stone well, rising from a sea of mountain misery. Two broken posts, blackened with rot, were speared into the earth on either side of the lichen-encrusted structure, implying a roof that had once barred the depths from the sky. The sight of it struck nails through my feet and into the detritus below. A terrible chill rolled over me, solidifying my joints mid-stride as my eyes fixed on the rough stone rim. Nothing else was near it. Piles of discarded trash and rotting wood were littered everywhere around the property, but the sea of sage-green undergrowth was clear of it all. It was alien to its surroundings, a sense of isolated reverence amongst the forgotten. I stood there for a long while, primed for paralysis by the shadowed roadway that had led me here. I was struggling to suppress my own internal dialogue as it sounded out words that I desperately didn't want to hear, but were strung together anyway. There's an angel in that well. Commitments were made long before any action were taken. Rules taught to us as children, biases we developed as we grow. Commitment is a guiding force that seems ethereal despite its source and logic. Our animal brains seek continuance, preservation against the withering of the world, and so we make decisions long before the moment we need would arrive. Walking the long, frightening path to the manor, forcing the gate open, driving away from the gloom of a dream being stolen away, one step towards the well. The first I saw were fingers, flowing over the rim before setting their grip onto the stone. 1, 4, 8, 16. 4 grayish-black hands forming a surreal compass on the masonry. And rising from the depths were more. The motion of those next 2 hands rising from the center of the well were ascendant. Clasped together in a notion of prayer, they rose from the well, absolute and unwavering locomotion, like the glittering stillness of laminar flow. They parted. They were struck together with force. A sound like thunder made me flinch. And when I looked back to the well, I saw a wedding. My wedding. She was there. A flowing red dress wreathed the earth below the altar, flowing down the steps like a river of satin. I felt a tug on my arm and turned to see my father, smiling as he prepared to walk me down the aisle. It was so warm, so bright, so fiercely divorced from the night that I'd left behind that it felt as though the world had flipped beneath my feet. When I turned to look at her face to drink in more of the sight, it was not her that I saw. It was the well. More hands on its edge, a tightly woven bud of knuckles and palms peeking over the lip, the arms that wrought thunder still raised high above, clasped together to imply a being pleading with the stars. Mountain misery tickled the top of my socks. Somehow I had moved closer to the well. Fingers flayed outward behind its amalgamous skull, forming a terrifying halo as it continued to ascend from the dark pit. More arms rose from below, and now 2 reverberations rattled my skull as the world gave way again. The bedroom. Heat flushed over me as something writhed beneath the comforter. The scent like lavender, sharp pricks of ecstasy. Sweat-covered skin peeling away from itself only to fall back together again. Supple sensations under my palms. Between my legs, we were there. I could feel it. Excitement flooded my chest as I envisioned her form, tangled together with mine. A briar with no thorns. Mystery not left to my imagination as the room fell away and I witnessed her against a torrent of shining white sheets. Guilt stabbed through the lustful ichor, and I turned away only to see the well. The thing had risen tall over me, the stonework within arm's reach. Terror gripped me as its head and chest began to bloom, fingers and fists peeling away from each other, revealing ever smaller variants until at each stamen rested chubby little hands that could only have belonged to a newborn. Cradled in its skull was an ornate lighter, gilded and shining in the distant light of my lantern. Clutched in its ribs was a pristine tower of red wax and wick. Fingers snapped into palms in what seemed like every direction, rhythmic dandelination, an instruction that bore into my soul. Light the candle. My whole body trembled. The honesty and its insistence laid bare its intent to see me harmed, but the nectar of its trap was intoxicating. The promise of everything I wanted sent shudders across my body that crashed into the terror rising in my guts. I reached for the candle, fingers drummed across its form in anticipation. My fingers wrapped the red wax and gently pulled it free from its chest. It shuddered. In pain or bliss, I remained to this day unsure. I touched the lighter. It fell easily into my palm. The drumming intensified. Waves of undulating digits rolled across its vaguely human silhouette. Fervent snaps forming a song of want and plenty. I struck the lighter, its light casting deep shadows that flexed and sprang away like fleeing rabbits. I brought flame to wick, and it drank gleefully. All at once the night went limp, gentle flicks of flame, that sole source of movement. The thing was dead still, frozen in its strange dance above the well. A sharp clap rang clear through the dark. Its sound reverberated endlessly in all directions, quickly growing in intensity. The tonal torrent was oppressive, and I backed away, holding firm to the candle while attempting to cover my ears. A new impression pierced my mind and engraved itself into the darkness behind my eyelids. When that candle goes out, you will die. Then it was quiet again. When I next opened my eyes, the world was white. Neither the well nor the manor in view, and then chaos. An unending hurricane of joy, hunger, pain, loss, and terror. Every second of my life was being playing out at nauseating pace that remains painful to recount. Sounds blended into screeching, disorienting scents, coalesced into vile incense, and my vision was a blur of shapes and colors. I was allowed to miss none of it. By some horrible curse, I felt every stab of pain, saw every sight, and agonized every emotion. The sensation of molten red wax pooling and flowing over my hands was dull and distant in comparison to the unending flood of input from my entire life. And then it became unfamiliar. The life I had yet to live shot past me at such speed that there was no time to dwell in any of it. Joy gave way so quickly to sadness, and in the next instant that sadness had reverted to joy, a cycle of existential whiplash, a sickening distillation of raw experience. The candle's flames drank hungrily at the wax. It might have been hours or days before I finally managed to call out into the opulescent fog of noise and static, "I don't want this!" My mouth failed to move. My flesh had become stone, bearing witness to the age of my own existence. "Please, just fucking stop!" Words that spanned years. I held them in my mind, trying desperately to shut out the smell of ammonia and my father's still face as it flew past. "I don't want this, please!" A new cry to mark a decade. Her face filled with wrinkles, a smell of nostalgia and comfort. My time was running short. A series of snaps shattered the stupor. Then offer them. I had no mind left to resist its offer. I didn't need to know what it wanted. I would have given anything to be free of this. I offer it, whatever it is. Just please make it fucking stop. The world came back into focus in an instant. I took huge gulps of air and crumpled into the undergrowth. Weeps and cries escaped me in uncontrolled spasms as I mourned a life I never lived. It offered me no time to grieve. Hands. I turned to the well, the candle now delicately perched on its edge. Nothing but a crater of wax held the wick aloft. Heart. Its intent laid bare in my mind, detailing an exchange so horrific. I considered letting the candle play out its course and spare me from its clutches. The offer was my freedom. Its price, my heart. The engine tucked away in my chest, it hungered for it. A desire so frightful and vast it would blot out the stars and sky alike. Hands emerged from the misery closer to the well. Palms upturned. The flame gently savored the air, its wick starting into a lean. A decision would have to be made soon. I was an animal faced with its own demise. I wanted only one thing in the world, to stay alive a little bit longer. I shuffled and scraped closer to the palms on the ground. My legs too weak to carry me, their fingers flexed and rolled as I drew closer. The thing above swayed to and fro like a tree in a thunderstorm, motions that became more feverish the closer I'd come. I rolled onto my knees as I locked hands with the well. The swaying mass trembled at my touch and stooped towards my prostrated body. More hands parted the undergrowth around me, gripping my shoulders and arching my back, forcing my stomach towards the well and my chest towards the sky. I'd never seen it so clear. The growing scar of the Milky Way was stark against the grand tapestry of ebony that held it above me. Imprisoned there before the vastness of the sky, it felt for a moment like I could fall into that endless depth. I stared hard at those stars, little dots of light a million miles away. A notion of vain naivety held me aloft for a moment more. I hope they remember me. A single muscular arm unfurled from the writhing silhouette, tracing through the night air towards the space between my midsection and chest. Its digits formed together into a spade before slipping beyond my vision. Fingers from below found their way between my lips to stifle and hold low. Each breath brought it closer. Uncontrollable spasms of terror racked my body in anticipation for what was to come. A small, firm pressure below my sternum signaled its arrival, pressing into my flesh. Deeper and deeper it went, the agony of my skin and muscle slipping aside the piercing path of the arm as it pressed on was horrific. I flexed and spasmed in its grip, desperate to flee the indescribable pain. I bit hard at the fingers in my mouth, no reaction. Its path and pace were absolute. All that came was a taste like licorice as they drowned my tongue in their weepings. Warm flows from the wound ran down my stomach and around my back. The whole hand was inside my torso, fingers wriggling away at my diaphragm. The barrier between my gut and chest burst as the wrist slipped below. The wound in my core widened to accommodate the forearm as its nails brushed my heart. Horror racked my violated body as the fingers curled around their prize. Each pulse of blood, a new revelation of agony, and then it began to pull. The annihilation of my entire form from toe to scalp. Every nerve in my body was on fire, my chest the hearth of hell. Blood vessels pulled taut as the arm retrieved from its burrow, snapping in sharp reliefs of pressure that wrought more and more waves of death and despair. The candle burned silently as the hand exfiltrated its crimson want. My body failing, I watched as it raised my desperately beating heart towards the open crown of its head. Many hands scratching at the air, desperate for a taste of the spasming organ. The hand drew close to the hungry bloom, palms closing eagerly around the red drum. And in a single sharp motion, it was crushed. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed my vision was ribbons of ruby spraying free in every direction. I woke just before the sun crested the horizon. I rose to my feet in the dim light, wisps of clay dust rising with me. No wind stirred the pines, birds filled the sky with song, and the crisp mountain air coalesced pools of mint in my lungs. My cathedral of respite, a promise that my ordeal had concluded. The well was gone. Nothing filled its place, just deep tire tracks and clay dust, a circle of river stones, filled with cold ash and coals. I set my palm to my chest. A rhythm like thunder greeted me from below my ribs. We didn't move away. Dad is happy. That girl is in my bed. The thing in the well hadn't lied to me, and as I lay here among the fruit of my every wish, writing down the macabre details of that night, I finally understand the cost of want and the price of plenty. Looking back, I remember how all my family's summer barbecues went the same way. There'd be the initial bustle of uncles and aunts arriving with kids, clinking paper bags full of liquor and lopsided foil trays of macaroni and lasagna. First, drinks were poured, meat was thrown on the grill, and cackles followed light gossip in the crowded kitchen. We ate, parents drank, and as the afternoon progressed, all of the cousins overcame their shyness and darted around the open backyard. The older crowd took up residence in plastic-woven chairs with cups in hand. As they ventured deeper down into their drinks, so too did the light chatter from earlier in the afternoon, descending into more serious subjects. It wasn't until I had reached 11 or 12 years old that I began to recognize the reoccurrence of the name Carrie May, uttered from the semicircle of elders across the lawn. I asked my mom about who she was while driving home from a barbecue one afternoon. She said, "I'll tell you when you're older." I'm 15 now, and the grown-ups still fall into whispers when I pass by their drinking circle if Carrie May is the topic of conversation. Little do they know that I have done quite a bit of sleuthing on my own, through equal parts hearsay, courtesy of older cousins, and eavesdropping. I've since managed to piece together a general account of what happened to my distant cousin Carrie May and her family. After the fact, I can understand why my mother and all the other grown-ups chose to keep her story away from us kids. It's to this day the scariest thing I have ever, or never, heard. It happened in a little town in the North Shore of Massachusetts called Middleton, where Carrie May and her parents, my aunt and uncle, lived. Middleton was still pretty undeveloped in the mid-'80s. Young couples looking to start a family often opted for the paved and well-lit streets of neighboring Danvers or Salem over the pocked dirt roads of Middleton. But my Uncle Steve and Aunt Lena, Carrie May's parents, were known for being somewhat bohemian. They were both painters who relished in the unfettered wilderness that the small wooded town had to offer. The family fit in well there. Carrie May grew up surrounded by the likes of artists, painters, and eccentrics who called that small stretch of forest home. On the evening that Carrie May went missing, her family was visiting a public patch of garden rented by one of her father's friends. This particular field was divided into dozens of small plots where the town's citizens could grow anything from cucumbers to black-eyed Susans. Their friend's plot bordered the forest surrounding the field. While the parents sat in rickety chairs among the watermelons, the kids darted in and out of the trees and played hide-and-seek. At one point in the evening, the other kids in the group came back to their parents saying that they couldn't find Carrie May. They'd been playing a game of hide-and-seek, and even though the game had been over for 20 minutes, Carrie May was still nowhere to be seen. At first, my aunt and uncle weren't that alarmed. They yelled her name from where they sat, expecting her to come running from the woods once she heard the voices. Carrie May was a playful and imaginative girl, but she was always well-behaved. That's why my Uncle Stephen and Aunt Lena started to get worried after only a few minutes of getting no answer from their calls into the woods. As the sun began to set, flashlights were retrieved from cars, and the grown-ups in the group fanned out into the surrounding woods to search for Carrie May. They called her name until 9 o'clock or so. After that, they called the cops. Days went by. Weeks. All the while, police officers and volunteers from Middleton and neighboring towns combed the woods, going miles into the New England forest. Yet despite the fervor of the search, not so much as a shoelace was recovered. After 1 month of flyers, false tips, and whirs of helicopter blades and television appearances, my aunt and uncle first began to consider the possibility that they would never see Carrie May again. But then, something extraordinary happened. Contrary to all statistics for missing children, kidnappings, and the rule of the first 48 hours, Carrie May was found. Or, more accurately, she just showed up. One day, roughly 5 weeks after her disappearance, she emerged, naked, bruised, and scratched from the woods at the exact spot that she had entered from. No one was at the gardening plot at the time, as it was 5 o'clock in the morning. She walked barefoot across the misty field and down the country road into town. Angus McLeod, a fry cook at N&J Donuts, was the first one to spot her. He called the police, who picked her up and brought her to the station. By 7:30, there had been a tearful reunion between Carrie Mae, Uncle Stephen, and Aunt Lena. By 9, the news of Carrie Mae's return had trickled through the neighborhood and was spilling over into the neighboring towns. 12 o'clock saw the long driveway to their home jammed with vans from every newspaper and television station on the North Shore, and by dinner time, all of Essex County was in celebration for the darling 13-year-old who had finally come home. "It was like a bad dream," Aunt Lena whimpered into a Channel 5 microphone. "A bad dream that I couldn't wake up from, but today I woke up." And so it seemed to that small pocket of Massachusetts in the dog days of 1985, like some great nightmare had hovered for a spell over their town only to move on, saving its worst for another time in another place. The story of Carrie Mae was not so simple and joyous as all the headlines and news anchors led the country's residents to believe, however. While vast coverage was devoted to Carrie Mae's initial reappearance, virtually no attention was given to the events which ensued weeks later, after all the fanfare had died down. By the time Carrie Mae had countless interviews with investigators and child psychiatrists regarding her disappearance, each of these efforts to discover what actually happened was discouraged, however, by Carrie Mae's persistent reply, "I don't remember anything." Making no headway, the professionals backed off but encouraged my Aunt Lena and Uncle Stephen to monitor Carrie Mae carefully for any unusual behavior. Yeah, was their typical Bohemian reply. They were just happy to have their daughter back. Carrie Mae was home. What was there to worry about? And indeed, for the first few weeks after Carrie Mae's return, there did seem to be little need for concern. Back at home in her own room, Carrie Mae quickly slid back into the old grooves of life as usual. She strung and beaded another dream catcher, feverishly chopped up fashion magazines for a new collage, played Carole King's Tapestry until the needle was shot, and ate tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches by the stack, with a side of cherry Coke, of course. My Uncle Stephen hired a few extra hands at his house painting company so that he could take some time off. The three of them made a trip up to Kenobi Lake Park, where Carrie Mae rode the Cannonball roller coaster a total of 8 times in 2 hours, breaking her own record. Within a 2-week period, they ate lobster rolls and French fries at the Clam Box 3 times, and they caught so many fireflies in the evenings that Aunt Lena guessed they could light Fenway Park with them. It truly seemed that life had returned to normal for the small family. Unfortunately, for Carrie Mae, Uncle Stephen, and Aunt Lena, those 2 happy weeks would prove to be no more than the eye of the storm. Something truly sinister lay on the horizon, and it came for a visit about 3 weeks after Carrie Mae's return. On the night it happened, Carrie Mae woke her parents up, saying that she couldn't sleep because of a noise in her bedroom. When asked what it sounded like, she said it was a sort of rubbing or grinding. My aunt and uncle went to her room, switching on the light, checking the corners and closet. They listened, too, but after a minute of hearing and seeing nothing out of the ordinary, they told Carrie Mae that she could sleep with them that night. They'd take a closer look at things in the morning. So all 3 of them went to bed and were soon asleep. In the very early morning, my Aunt Lena woke up to go to the bathroom. It was down the hall on the left, just past Carrie Mae's room, and after using the toilet, she was passing Carrie Mae's room when something caught her eye at the window. From the door, she could see Carrie Mae's window, which was open as it had been earlier that night. Nothing unusual there. What was unusual, what made my aunt's blood suddenly run cold, was the flap of torn screen hanging down into the room. Slowly, she padded past the threshold, across the floorboards over to the window. Reaching down and picking up the flap of screen, she noticed that the edges were gnarled and frayed, as if it had been sawed through with a blunt instrument. With a chill, she realized that this was the sound that Carrie Mae had heard, the cutting of the screen. As she examined it, she suddenly noticed something long and dark lying on the floor beneath the window. Picking it up, she noted its lightness, how it was smooth on one side but curled and grimy on the other. One end of it was jagged, as if it had broken off of something. The other was a fine point, with a sharp edge running down one side. A bone, she thought. Looking back and forth from the object to the window screen, she had felt the material before, felt it every day of her life. No, not a bone. It was then that she came to the sickening realization of what had been used to open the screen that she heard it. A wet, guttural growl. She turned quickly to her left, expecting to find an animal. What she saw instead made the room spin. There in the corner, lit partially by moonlight, stood a woman. But not just any woman. It was the most horrifying creature, animal or man, she had ever seen. The mere sight of it made her sick with revulsion and terror. It was completely emaciated. The filthy floral dress hung loosely from its shoulders. Its neck barely looked able to support the large head covered by a great, wild, and greasy nest of black hair. Strands shot in rays all around its skeletal face. Its wide, pale eyes, hid back in two caves within the skull, looked drugged, frantic, desperate, and even a bit mirthful. They hung above a thin, carved sliver of a mouth, which seemed both to smirk and scowl, revealing flashes of black, rotten teeth. Bloody scratches and splotches of mud, dirt, and filth speckled its twig-like arms. It had no shoes on. Both feet were black with earth, and brown claw-like toenails dug into the floor where it stood. The nails on its hands were easily the length of the fingers from which they grew. In a fitting observation, they reminded Aunt Lena of the sloths she had once seen at the zoo. 9 great black curls hung from the 10 grimy fingers. The 10th, of course, Aunt Lena held in her own hand. It had belonged to the left index. Upon seeing the cracked stump where it had once been, she dropped it to the floor. The thing raised its right arm and pointed a dagger nail at Carrie Mae's empty bed. It growled again, only this time Aunt Lena realized it wasn't a growl at all. It was a word. Girl. Where's the girl? As it spoke, drool dribbled from its cracked lips, from between jagged black teeth. Strings of it glistened in the moonlight and pooled onto the ends of its massive toenails. Some of it hung from the dark, slender chin before stringing down onto the front of its dress. While watching the spittle roll down past the bumps of its tiny breasts, Aunt Lena came to another horrifying realization. She had seen that pattern before. Purple flower, yellow flower, purple flower, yellow flower. TJ Maxx back-to-school sale. Dear God, I bought that dress. That's Carrie Mae's dress. The thing lurched forward now with something clutched in its left hand. Something that had been hidden in the darkness. A sack. A giant, coarse, ancient-looking burlap sack with its wide, dark mouth gaping open, and the creature clicked forward on its gnarled toenails, the great sack hissing across the floorboards at its side. As it advanced, the mouth tightened from a bitter scowl into a wide black grin. A grin denoting an epiphany. "You'll do," it gargled, and practically giggled as it motioned with its free hand toward the open sack. Get in. Get in. Get in. Its eyes went wide, wider than any eyes Aunt Lena had seen before, its wet black mouth open and shut in a gnashing grin as it began to make clumsy swipes at my aunt with its right hand. "You'll do. Get in." It barked all in one garbled word. "You'll do getting." At this point, Aunt Lena found her vocal cords, which, up until that point, had been stifled with pure terror. Her survival instincts loosened the screams that had been mounted in her throat since seeing that flap of torn screen. She screamed with all the delirium and abandon of a creature caught in the claws of death. Backed up against the wall behind her, she quickly scuttled sideways towards the doorway and dashed, screeching down the hall towards her bedroom. My Uncle Stephen was already out of bed. He followed my aunt's shaking finger back towards Carrie Mae's bedroom, only now to find gauzy curtains fluttering in the wind. At the window, he could just make out a thin, dark form retreating to the forest's edge. Dawn saw many of the same officers who had calmed, questioned Carrie Mae 3 weeks before, combing the property. Kicking through tall grass and brush with flashlights, not far from where Uncle Stephen had seen it enter the woods. Officers found what looked like a rudimentary campsite. The bones and viscera of squirrels sat in a pile by a leaf pine needle mattress. A dugout latrine sat 10 paces from the bed, and under a log near the squirrel remains. Officers recovered soggy, moldering newspapers chronicling the return of Carrie Mae. The entire site had a direct view of Carrie Mae's bedroom window. It was quickly surmised by everyone at the scene that the woman had camped out in the woods near the house for some time before attempting to abduct Carrie Mae. Maybe a week, maybe more. Police obtained a sketch of the woman based off of my Aunt Lena's account of that night. It was distributed throughout the county's police departments. The sketch was also used in one final interview with Carrie Mae following the incident at the house. Carrie Mae, who had been surprisingly calm during the whole event, took one look at the sketch of the woman and began to shake uncontrollably. She had a fit, bordering on epileptic, where in the office of the Middleton police chief, while screaming, she attempted to rip off her own skin with her fingernails, screeching, "Like this." She did it like this. A team of psychiatrists later theorized that Carrie Mae's previous abduction had been so traumatic that she had repressed it, leaving no conscious memory of her time in the woods. Upon seeing a portrait of her abductor, however, those memories all came rushing back, overloading her conscious mind, frying it with madness. She left the police department that day on a stretcher, her hands and feet bound by leather straps. Rumor has it that she began to laugh uncontrollably in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. She's lived at McLean Psychiatric Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts ever since. The North Shore Snatcher, as she came to be called in the local folklore, was never found. It's 2016 now, and for all I know, she's dead. Or perhaps she's moved on to woods in some other county, some other state. Who knows? The truth is, she doesn't even need to be alive or present to exist. Like something as traumatic as a shark attack, a plane crash, the memory of what happened to Carrie Mae and her family echoes down the years, so that even decades later, the fear remains fresh. So odd and disturbing was the event that the old folks are still left glued to their chairs at summer barbecues, brooding over their drinks and trying to piece it all together. All the while, they keep a watchful eye on that border where the lawn ends and the woods begin. Occasionally, a young cousin will dash in amongst the trees, only to hear behind them, "Hey, get out of there," from their parents. "You don't know what's in there." The little culprit will emerge from the bushes, stomping its feet in protest and whining, "Why not? There's no poison ivy around here." But by that point, the parents looking past the child, into the gloom beyond the birches. more to themselves than anyone else. They'll mutter, "It ain't poison ivy I'm worried about." There are 9 of them total. 9 massive concrete chimneys sticking out of the landscape like candles on a birthday cake. Up until my last week, the scariest thing about them was the deep booming noise they sometimes produced, which shook the ground. The ferocity of a subwoofer cranked up all the way. They'd spout out one at a time, like geysers releasing pressure. I'd walk the perimeter, and there went chimney 3, followed by chimney 5, and then suddenly chimney 8 and 9 would go together. That's as weird as it got. Before I noticed the thing in chimney 7. I want to make it clear from the get-go, I have no idea what the chimneys do or why they're here. They're alone in a fenced-off field with no buildings in sight. There are 3 padlocked doors on opposite ends of the property, and roads made only from the flattening effect of tires on grass, the one nearest to chimney 7 being overgrown. I think there must be bunkers beneath my feet, although I suppose the doors could also lead to storage sheds. It's hard to tell, and I've been told not to ask. Why are the chimneys there? Is this some sort of nuclear power plant? Are they testing sound cannons? Are they part of an experiment? Pressure valves from a dormant supervolcano? I don't have answers to those questions. I wish I did, but I'm just a temp. Anytime I've tried asking, I've been told the answers were on a need-to-know basis, and all I needed to know was that the chimneys needed patrolling, and that patrolling them was my job. That and reporting anything unusual. The first few weeks were fine. It took a bit of adjusting, especially to the noise. The first time I heard the boom, I was so scared I nearly peed myself. I thought something had gone wrong and that the whole field was about to collapse. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but really, put yourself in my shoes. You're minding your own business when your temp agency calls in the middle of the night. Is an employer offering twice your hourly rate on the condition that you leave immediately. It's the new moon, right? So you drive 30 miles out of town in complete darkness. You get there. There's only one guy there to greet you. He tells you their patrolman never showed up for his shift tonight. Gives you the job. Makes you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Tells you to walk around the field, climb the chimneys, radio and anything strange. That's it. He leaves you there. You start to walk. It's the dead of night, no traffic. Complete and utter silence. And then suddenly, boom! It is terrifying. I tried to radio it in, but it took half an hour to find a spot where the connection was strong enough to hear the reply. That's normal. Keep patrolling. That's what they told me. Cold, clinical, straightforward. Each subsequent boom made me less and less nervous, but I never quite got out of the split second of dread they caused. I think it's because they came at random. There was no way to brace myself. If you know every single garbage bin might have someone in it waiting to jump out at you, but you don't know which or when, that spike in your heart rate will be a lot higher. I'm not here to tell you about the booming noises. I'm here to tell you about Chimney 7. Chimney 7 was just like all the others. I'd say it was approximately 9, maybe 10 stories high. There was a graded and, in places, rusty spiral staircase circling around it all the way to the top. I couldn't tell you the exact circumference, but it was wide enough that you'd be able to drop a car into the hole without hitting the sides. It took approximately 6 minutes to climb the stairs and only 5 to get back down. And that's without resting. Up until my last week, Chimney 7 was no different from the others. And then came the night where everything changed. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. And halfway through my shift, I'd grabbed an old baseball cap from the back of my truck to keep my head warm. Nothing special, just a green cap with Fido Dido printed on it. Yeah, I know, showing my age. Although I'd never seen smoke coming from the chimneys, despite me calling them chimneys. That evening, as I approached Chimney 7, I spotted a small wisp of smoke billowing through the air. Since it was my job to report anything unusual, I tried radioing out, but all I heard was static. Couldn't have been farther from the spot my signal normally goes through if I'd been actively trying to avoid it, so I decided that if I was going to make the effort to walk all the way back, I better make damn sure I had something to report. Began climbing the steps around Chimney 7. And as I did, I heard a low growl that stopped me dead in my tracks. I closed my eyes, and I listened. But I couldn't pinpoint the source. Figured it was the sound of the grate buckling in the cold, maybe scraping against the concrete wall, but the closer I got to the top, the louder it got. Once I reached the topmost platform, I realized it was coming from the chimney. Something mechanical, I figured. Probably malfunctioning to boot. I figured I'd have a look into the chimney. I was reluctant, see. I'd never tried before, nor have I been instructed to do so. I mean, I suppose I could have, but those damn sonic-like booms made me nervous. All those nights in the dark made my imagination run wild, and I had this vivid, unshakable mental image that if I craned my neck and looked into the hole, the chimney would boom, and my head would just be blasted straight off my neck. With that fear very much at the forefront of my mind, I gripped the edge of the chimney and shyly poked my head over just enough to be able to see. There was nothing but blackness beyond the top few stories. Blackness and a symphony of wind howling through the tunnel, with a growl that seemed to cycle from low to high to low again, as though the chimney were a sleeping, snoring giant. No sooner had I popped my head in did I pull it back out, and that was enough bravery for one night. I climbed down and hurried to the radio spot, giving my report. But while it did sound like the signal went through, I never got a reply. The next night, I wasn't quite as reluctant to look into Chimney 7. All evening, I'd kept tabs of which chimney had been booming, and good old 7 hadn't done it once. I figured it really was defective, and therefore safe. I climbed the stairs to the same growly tune, and I peered inside, pushing my head in further than the night before. A gust of wind coming from deep below flung my cap in the air and out of reach. It spiraled its way down the chimney like a helicopter seed, disappeared from sight. I wasn't fond enough of the cap to contact the employer and beg for it back, but I wished I had something to stay warm. I flicked my flashlight on and moved the beam in circles, if only to see what had become of it, but the light couldn't penetrate far enough to see the bottom. Oh well. Again, I went back to the radio hotspot, and again, I mentioned the dysfunctional chimney. Still no reply. Something told me to steer clear of Chimney 7, and I listened to my guts for as long as I could. I'd circle close, but not too close to it, examining it from the vantage points of Chimney 6 and 8. I did this for 3 nights until I received my direct deposit paycheck and felt guilty about not doing my job, For my next shift, I bought a heavy-duty flashlight, and then I headed straight for Chimney 7. The light reached considerably farther. Down to ground level, I think, but even so, I couldn't see the bottom. What I could see, however, was that at about 3 stories down, just below where my original flashlight stopped working, I discovered scratch marks. I mean, I guess they could have been anything. Even with 20/20 vision, it's hard to tell a scratch from, say, a scratch-shaped graffiti. All I know is there was something marking up the walls all along the circumference. I mean, I was already spooked from the scratches, so I don't know if what I saw next was my mind playing tricks on me, but as I panned the halo around, I caught something on the farthest side. It was some sort of long, black shape. As soon as my light hit it, 2 bright spots reflected back at me and momentarily blinked at me. By the time my vision finally cleared and I looked again, there was nothing but concrete below. Took all my strength to finish my shift. I just had to remember the dollar signs that came with the mounting terror. They somehow convinced me I was imagining things. All the chimneys were quiet, and I found myself dreading the silence more than I dreaded the booms. It was raining, hard, which might explain why, as I walked past Chimney 7, I couldn't hear the growl I'd become accustomed to. I didn't want to go up, but I couldn't neglect my rounds again. It wouldn't be right. I was careful the whole way, hand clinging to the guardrail as I navigated the slippery circular staircase. Every step seemed to make the whole thing shake, and I was afraid the rusted metal would break once and for all. I was suddenly very aware of my added weight, what with the water having seeped into my clothes. Fortunately, the structure held, even though its integrity was in question. As I reached the platform at the top, I thought I could breathe a sigh of relief, but something caught my eye while I was trying to catch my breath. The rim of the chimney was broken. Large pieces of concrete littered the platform. I didn't need a flashlight to see the scratches this time. As I glanced into the chimney, I found deep gouges scratched up the wall all the way to the top, 3 on each side, with a 4th that seemed to come from a different angle. The cuts were deep and purposeful, like desperate fingers raking a cliffside as a hiker clung for dear life. Whatever had clawed its way up, machine, animal, or... I didn't want to think of the alternatives. It was now somewhere out there, in the dark, and its grip was strong enough to break concrete. I had had enough. Everything about this damn job put me on edge, and even though there was a reasonable explanation, maybe the gouges had been made by a grappling hook or a device to slide down the chimney from the top, like the ones window cleaners use, I was done. I was D-O-N-E done. As much as I wanted to run down the staircase and back to my truck, the rain was still coming down in sheets, and the last thing I needed was to slip and crack my head open, so I went slowly and methodically. And then suddenly, my worst nightmare came true. The stairs shook violently. I didn't mean that there was a gust of wind that made them jitter. I mean, they were shaking. My stomach dropped to my feet as I imagined whatever had created those deep cuts in the chimney was now climbing up towards me. The metal screeched as it bent, a sound far more unsettling than growling coming from a chimney, and a sound more grounded in reality and in danger. I screamed and hung onto the railing for dear life, and then I felt a pop. Not in my body, but against my body, but through the metal. Pop, pop, pop. The bolts connecting the hinges to the chimney were falling out one by one. Through the heavy rain, I could have sworn I heard a scream like a coyote, and then the staircase went still. I was out of breath. I was on my knees, arms wrapped around the railing and paralyzed with fear. I could tell the structure was no longer safely fastened to the tower, as it was swinging in the wind. But I couldn't see the extent of the damage. It took me a few minutes to gather the courage to start moving my white knuckles stiffly, releasing my death grip. It should have taken 5 minutes to get back down, but I spent 15. The longest 15 minutes of my life. I could hear the staircase shifting as I slowly made my way from step to step, hoping it would hold and trying not to shift my weight and throw everything off kilter. I didn't know how many bolts were left, or if my weight could make the others come out. As I neared the bottom, I saw the final flight had been pulled from a chimney. It was now suspended in the air. The handrail was warped outwards and undulated in parts like a bent twist tie. It was still too high to jump off, so I had to climb down as the stairs rocked like a ship in a storm. Solid ground never felt more solid. Until I saw something out of the corner of my eye. And the bottom seemed to drop out from under me. Between chimney 6 and 7, I found a baseball cap. It was shredded, but there was no mistaking the Fido Dido logo on it. It was mine. Around it were long, narrow footprints about the length of my arm, with branches stretching out in 4 different directions like talons. I didn't wait around to see what had left them. It's been 2 months since that night. I haven't gone back. I keep receiving paychecks. Like clockwork. Every 2 weeks there's another direct deposit in my bank account. I don't know if it's to buy my silence, or if there's just no one left to take me off the payroll. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen, those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/Mr. Creepypasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, Sillyman, Brandon Mendoza, Brimstone Pandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, Lakeda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kincaid, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Hurst Pox Primark, M, Jettis Pet, Clonable, Jay Kieran, Mike, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Ficomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelkin, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kinchin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.